I'm Sue Plans. I'm with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, Public Safety Communication. Thank you all for coming today. This is great. We have a full house, and hopefully we'll have some great participation. We have some wonderful people on our panel you'll hear soon. Just some housekeeping. The restrooms are out the door and down the hall to the left. There's food downstairs, and we have water in the back. And if you like and haven't done so either during a break, you can validate your parking on the back table by the water. For those participating on the WebEx, please feel free to use the chat button up on the upper right hand of your screen, and you can participate by asking questions and comments, please. And with that, I'd like to introduce Karen Wong, our Assistant Director for the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, Public Safety Communications, and your state point of contact with FirstNet. Thank you.
Never sure about these things. Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to see everyone here today. When I walked in this morning, I kind of looked around the room. I thought, there's a bunch of tables, a bunch of seats. I'm sure hoping it gets filled up. And can you guys hear me? Is it okay? And it is. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have probably about 100 people in the room, and we have about 90 people or so on a webinar. So this is our first town hall that we've had with our federal partners. And we've been looking at FirstNet for a while and doing outreach. And we realized how important our federal partners are to make this system really work. So this is the first, actually, in the nation, a federal partner collaboration. So we're kind of the first in starting to get the ball rolling. What I wanted to ask also is, how many of you have heard of FirstNet? How many of you are associated with fire, law, EMS, 911? Oh, good. That's a pretty good mix with everyone. How many of you are with city, county, local government? I'm sorry, I'm doing all the polls. I want to know who's in the room. And state? Federal. Well, the federal government will be explaining a lot to all of our state and local governments today. I'm really, really excited about this. So I wanted to go over a little bit of why we're here and what we plan to do today, and what my role is of the state point of contact. Right now, what we've all been asked for, every state has a point of contact, and we're responsible to make sure we're doing the outreach, make sure folks are knowing about FirstNet, what we need to do to build it. And what I want to stress to everyone today is this is your network. This is not the state's network. This is all of our network. It has to work for everyone. So your opinion matters. Your participation matters. So please, during the day, our town halls are a little bit different now. We're a lot more interactive. So during the presentations, if you have a question, raise your hand and ask the question and get some dialogue going. We absolutely want to hear from all of you. And the folks on the webinar, I believe there's a way that you can actually, I'm seeing Paul nod his head, ask a question via the web, and we will get the question up so we can answer that as well. And there's also cards on your table if you don't want to raise your hand and ask, and you just want to jot them down, hand them to one of our folks that are working and helping us out, and we will still be able to answer the question. We absolutely want to hear from you. And to put this together today was a lot of work, and so I'd like to thank some folks. Jody Travisario, who is the Cal OES Coastal Regions Regional Administrator, she helped with getting a lot of our presenters. The Holiday Inn Catering Manager, Arlindo Acade, I hope I pronounced that correctly, for his assistance and also setting up this room for us today. And then each of our panel members and presenters today. Today our panel members are, the first one who's not here yet is TJ Kennedy. He's the Acting First Responder Network Authority, FirstNet Board of Director, is Executive Director. TJ's flight was a little bit late. He's driving from San Francisco now. We're hoping to see him in about an hour. So we'll be kind of moving our agenda around a little bit. We also have Joe Wassel. He's the Department Department of Defense, Chief Information Officer, and then the C4, do I have that? C4, Resilience Director. Did I get that right? Okay. And then Lieutenant Commander Sean Lansing, he's the Command Center Chief, United States Coast Guard, Sector San Francisco. And Mike Senna, I'm so bad with names, sorry, Director, Northern California High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. And Mike Boyden, who is with SAIC, and they're our contractor to help with all of our outreach. He's the Program Director. So as we go through, I just want to give a little bit of overview of what FirstNet is. And if you look at the FirstNet by the numbers, I believe it's been scrolling. If we can go right to the first slide, Paul. So FirstNet became FirstNet in February of 2012 when the President signed the, I'm not going to get this right, the Middle Class Tax Relief Act. Section 6 of that act was our ability to put together the first nationwide public safety broadband network. We actually got funding behind that of $7 billion, and anybody in this room will know $7 billion will not build out a nationwide network. But this initiative was so important that they were able to put some funding behind it. So it actually gives us money to start looking at how we can put FirstNet together and actually get it off the ground. So they do, at the federal level, there is a governance, which is called the FirstNet Board of Directors, and they have 15 members between telecommunications, the public sector, and the industry. All the states have a single point of contact, and there's a 40-member Public Safety Advisory Committee, referred to as PSAC, that is also helping with the technical pieces for FirstNet. So who will use FirstNet? At the nation level, it's about 5 million plus users. In California, we're looking at about 200,000. I think that number is a little bit low, but we won't be able to validate exactly what that number will be without all of your help and as we go through the process. And FirstNet is, okay, there we go. Oh, there. The way we'll accomplish FirstNet will be a multitude of ways. We're hoping that we will be able to, of course, bring a network everywhere. That will take some time. So we're also looking at possibly satellite and other terrestrial-based type of a network, and you'll hear a lot about that today. It's all 4G LTE. We have 20 megahertz of very important and prime location in the frequencies. So we're very, very lucky. During 2014 through 2016, FirstNet's working at getting all the states' plans prepared. So each state will have their initial state consultation. There's several states that have had theirs. I've been fortunate enough to go to Oregon's, Nevada's, and Texas consultation meetings. We will be having ours, I believe, the week of June 23rd is what we're looking at now. We're still wrestling with if we want to have 3 separate consultation meetings, or if we want to just have one very large consultation meeting that goes for a couple of days. In Texas, they're a huge state, and what they did was have a day-and-a-half meeting with the room probably 3 times the size of this, and it was very interactive. It was very, very good. So we have to stop and go back to our board members and find out really what would be the best way to collect all the information as we go forward. In 2016 and forward, we should have plans to all of our governors. The governors make the final decision if we go with FirstNet, so we should be, or if we opt in or opt out. Opting in, FirstNet builds the network. Opting out, the states would have the responsibility of building the radio access network that will connect with the FirstNet core. And so we will be looking at that. We're hoping to have a very good collaborative process, which I know FirstNet is committed to, that by the time we get to the governor to make the decision, everyone, all of you, everyone that participates will know where we're at and know what we're going to do as we go forward. And then by 2022, FirstNet needs to be substantially built and operational. And this is a very, very large project as you look at this, but it is so important to public safety. It is so important to all of us to get this done. Whether or not we opt in or opt out, that part doesn't matter. Getting this network built is what really, really is important. We had our FirstNet town hall up in Humboldt County. And Sue Swenson, we were fortunate enough to have Sue Swenson as our speaker for FirstNet, and she is the chairperson for the FirstNet Board of Directors. During her speech, we had a 5.8 earthquake that kind of shook the building. And what happened is the first thing everybody does is get on their smartphone to tell everybody we just had an earthquake. And we started having problems with our webinar, and the network started to fail. And so just something like that with no damage already caused a problem with our network. So getting off the commercial network is critical for public safety. In California, what does FirstNet look to us? Paul, thank you. We have set up a governance structure similar to what FirstNet Board of Directors is. We have over 2,100 public safety agencies. Paul? Wrong way. Thank you. We have over 163 square miles, 58 counties, 478 incorporated cities. We have 109 tribes, all which will be able to be on FirstNet as well, equal to any of the states. 11 ports. Ports are extremely important when it comes to public safety. And 3,400 special districts. Our coverage challenge is huge. When you look at how the demographics are of California with the population, the topology and geography, about 5% is considered dense urban or urban. 81% is considered rural. And then we have our forest, our wilderness, which is 14%. And I know that the wilderness is going to be our biggest challenge, and I've seen some CAL FIRE folks, at least one. That's where our forest fires are. That's where we also need FirstNet. So we can't discount any location in California. We have to make sure that we provide FirstNet the information they need to provide us the network, really to serve our public safety agencies in California. All the information is available online, and we do have some handouts up front, but it's all on our website at caloes.gov. Okay. And so with that, I'm going to turn our next presentation over, as I've now messed everything up here, to what would have been TJ, so we will hold off. Normally we have FirstNet come and give a big overview of FirstNet, and then we go to the state level. We're going to work right into the state level. So what does FirstNet mean to California? And that'll be Michael Boyden.
Thanks, Karen. Well, as we get queued up, just to reiterate, I'm not TJ Kennedy. He's on his way from the airport. He texted me. And so we'll be hearing from him on the second half of our program. What I'll be doing is pretty much going down the same sort of path that Karen just did, but at a different level, and highlighting a few other things along the way. And I'll also be talking a little bit more to kind of set the stage about what FirstNet is, since you don't have the benefit of TJ's presentation until later. We'll first talk about the vision of FirstNet and how why that's important to us, and how we're planning to go get to the end of that road that Karen provided, as well as what is at the end of the road. How are we going to use this new network? We're going to talk about governance, how California has been structured to make this happen within the state. And then we'll go down that road as far as the near-term actions that will take place in getting this network accomplished in the state. Okay, here's the vision. To provide emergency responders with the first nationwide, high-speed, wireless broadband network dedicated to public safety. Now, I'm emphasizing those words because this is kind of a tight sentence, and I want to unpack it a little bit. And we'll start from the back moving forward. First, let's talk about a dedicated network. Today, if you're using broadband wireless, in other words, high-speed data over the air for public safety service, you're probably using it from a commercial carrier, a Verizon, an AT&T, who's providing you that service. It's the same service that you have on your smartphone today, your kids have on their tablets, and your neighbor has down the street. And for the most part, that works just fine until, as Karen mentioned, something happens. And then everybody, just like this traffic jam on the road, you get a traffic jam in the cell sector and no one goes anywhere, including public safety. And that becomes a real issue because, as you can see here, no one's getting out of this freeway mess anytime soon, and neither is their data, and that includes the ambulance. And so with FirstNet, it's not going to be that way. FirstNet designates a dedicated network. If you can imagine alongside here a multi-lane highway with no one on it and the ambulance on there, that's what it's going to be like in the time of emergency for FirstNet. Another thing that I'd like to just kind of move back that statement a little bit, again, backing from the back to the front, is the whole idea of a high-speed wireless network, what they call broadband. Why do we need that? Well, frankly, we're doing it to ourselves in public safety. Here's an example from urban law enforcement. What's happening is this emerging need for high-speed, time-sensitive data in the field. In other words, this is stuff that's important right now, and it has to get to somebody right now in order for it to be useful. If you just kind of move up that bandwidth ladder, you first start with sound. There's technology now like shot spotters, which triangulate gunshots to direct a public safety response. There's, going up a little farther, images, license plate readers. Mike Cena and I were talking about just all the value of this sort of technology, running from drug interdiction all the way to just catching a bad guy going across a county line that has a reader in place. Going up a little farther, let's talk about video. Video is probably the largest bandwidth component that requirement that you'll see right now, but the sources of video are many. We're talking law enforcement using video from, for example, residences, from industry. They're actually using it from the officers themselves, body cameras. They're not without controversy, but as you've heard recently in the news, in fact, there was something in the Wall Street Journal today about body cameras, and Obama's put millions into it. They're not going away, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Studies that I'd read, like from last year, show that up to 60% less use of excessive force is realized when an officer has a body camera. And the reverse is true. What they found in other studies is that when the public is aware there's a body camera in place, they behave better. You're going to smile, you're on camera. Finally, there's the public themselves. You see a crime in progress, got a video clip, want to get it to your local precinct, there's an app for that. And so this whole set of data continues to increase and become more relevant in terms of responding to public safety. How do you get that across the ether, across the wireless network? Well, FirstNet is putting in place a public safety broadband network. And as Karen mentioned, the law that was put in place in 2012 allocated $7 billion to build that deployment. It also allocated, as she mentioned, 20 megahertz of spectrum at the 700 megahertz range. Now that's, Chief Jess Johnson, he's a deputy chair for FirstNet. He likes to call it the linebacker of spectrum. And for good reason, it has to do with its propagation and penetration capabilities. If, for example, the law had instead provided a spectrum, let's say up where Sprint has theirs at 2.5 gigahertz or so, public safety would have to build 13 to 15 more cell sites than a single cell site to provide the same coverage at this bandwidth range. The spectrum itself is worth billions of dollars on the market. Finally, the law has provided that LTE 4G technology as a requirement. It's not just specifying this act specifies the network has to be built, it's talking about how it has. And the reason for specifying LTE is it's an international standard. As you can see, you've probably been bombarded for months now about the 4G commercial carrier commercials about, from T-Mobile and AT&T and Verizon. This is the same technology. And so the idea here is to increase and take advantage of the volume of use in terms of devices that brings the price down then for public safety use. What I'd like to do now is let's talk about what those uses might be. All right, before I go into kind of what the future uses might be, what I want to do first is let's talk about what is being used right now. And so let's see, let me get this on. For the folks on the WebEx, if you can, go up to your right into the top of your screen, click on the chat box. What I'm looking for is, if you would, let me know what sorts of wireless data applications are being used in your agency today. You know, these things can range from dispatch all the way out to just doing email, which is also a critical item. But if you would, type those in right now, and then I'll ask Paul what you got. In the meantime, he's going to take care of that. Here on the floor, if you would just raise your hand if your agency uses wireless data right now for day-to-day. All right, let's just, how about you in the back? Just what's your agency and what do they use it for?
And currently we're using it for all of our mobiles for our police officers.
Okay, and what kind of applications are they using? Like,
we're using our computer-aided dispatch, and then also for our AFR RMS in field reporting.
Okay, so just for the folks on the WebEx, we're talking field reporting, talking CAD. Let's see, somebody else, raise your hands one more time. So, you, sir. We need the mics because the folks on the remote can't hear.
We have mobile data computers in all the fire engines and chief officer vehicles, and we also send text messages to all the responders to their smartphones on the location of the incidents. And also we get data from remote automated weather stations and other things back.
Okay, so we're talking telemetry, talking text, talking more of the dispatch. That's great. Okay, over here, sure. Right here, Greg. Yeah, right around the horn.
John Schmidt, Department of Transportation. We use wireless for video surveillance of our structures and traffic cameras.
All right, thank you. Hey, Paul, do you have anybody on the net there that has anything else that we haven't talked about? Okay, so Pulse Point, which is an app, ReadyNet. Now, I'm not familiar with ReadyNet. Anybody know what that is? Go ahead. What?
It's a hospital. It's a hospital to. It's from the ambulance.
Okay. Okay, everybody heard that. For the WebEx folks, it's an emergency medical application, and it's used kind of from the ambulance forward in towards the hospital. Okay, let's talk about those sorts of applications that you might see in the future. We already talked about a lot of the ones, whoops, I didn't do that. There we go. Towards the bottom of this, which has to do with, we talked about remote going right from the bottom. The field reporting, database queries, we talked about some of that. The kind of the middle, the situational awareness types of things are what you were hearing, for example, in the ReadyNet and some of those sorts of applications. One of the things that's going to be different about this LTE network than what you're doing if you're using like 3G networks today from commercial is going from 3G to 4G is like going from bandwidth size from a garden hose to a fire hose. As Karen mentioned, 10 times is the entire magnitude of faster, bigger. And so what that allows is video. So what you'll be seeing is one-way video, two-way video, high resolution, high definition video will be possible if you're in the right spot in that cell. What I'd like to do now is want to jump forward to the future, and some of the exact things that you've mentioned, we're going to provide an example of the scenario of what I think is going to be really important. We're here in Silicon Valley, San Jose, the heart of innovation in this area, and what you'll see eventually will not be just these point applications, but you'll see things that they call machine-to-machine communications using that IP network, the Internet Protocol Network that FirstNet's going to be riding on. And so what will happen is, well, they just had a conference here in January, they call it IoT. It's the Internet of Things. Things will be talking to other things, but what the result is for public safety is it become a seamless support. You're not going to have to worry about it or focus on, did I get that? It's just going to happen and flow with you. With that, Paul, if we got sound on, let's just run this. It's about a minute clip.
accident. Do you understand me? Given the nature of your injuries, we'd like you to speak to a specialist on video. Is that all right?
I'm Dr. Greer. There are a few questions I'd like to ask you.
That's the far future, huh? If you look at that video and really break it down, though, there's really like three things happening that have been seen together. The first one is like OnStar as an app, and we've got OnStar and had that for a while. The second is, ubiquitous electronic medical records, which we may not have for a while, but at least there's a start in that point. But the third part, from the ambulance forward, Paul, that thing's, I think you've got it on revolve. Turn that off while I'm talking. Okay. And the third piece is from the ambulance MDT, where he's typing it in on, is really FirstNet. That was wireless data all the way from the Dr. Greer and prior to that. And it's kind of like the ReadyNet on steroids, what you can see in the future when you move past telemetry of like EKGs and things like that. But taken together, it creates this seamless response that's a help to public safety. All right, now let's talk a little bit about California and the challenges that Karen had mentioned with respect to getting this network done here. First, the technology. We had talked about this being LTE. If you were going to build a land mobile radio, a mission-critical push-to-talk voice network here in California, you're going to do that first by finding the tallest spots you can find, like a mountain would be great, and then putting as tall as an antenna as you can afford. And then you'd broadcast 20, 40 miles out. And you'd use relatively high-powered devices, 5 to as much as 100 watts. Not so with FirstNet. With FirstNet, it's LTE. It's cellular technology, just like the carriers use. So it's the bottom picture there, where you see small cells, 1 to 5 miles in radius. You see low-power handsets, maybe as little as a quarter watt. And what you can see is the net of that is if you're going to build something, you're going to have to build more of them doing this. And the challenge with FirstNet is, unlike a commercial carrier, which builds service where there are subscribers that can pay for the service, FirstNet needs to build the service and provide it where first responders respond to incidents. And for California, as Karen mentioned, that's about everywhere. If you look at fires, well, there's a whole lot that happened, fortunately, not where people live. But last year was the hottest year in record in the world, and also in California. And so you can see there's going to be just more and more of a need to have that sort of coverage as folks go out and respond. Same thing we talked about earthquakes. Well, they're not just up in Humboldt County, and I was there and it did shake. But it knows no regional boundaries. The third thing that's particularly of interest is critical infrastructure. There's areas in the state that you know you're going to need FirstNet service. And these range from the obvious ones, hospitals, prisons, courthouses, the ports that Karen mentioned, all the way out to things where there aren't necessarily people around, and they're built out there for a reason, like pipelines or reservoirs. All those areas need to have FirstNet coverage. What I'd like to do is, while we're thinking about that, we're going to be actually telling FirstNet about what we need in terms of coverage. So I want to go back out to the web folks again, as well as here in the room, and I'd be interested in hearing what sorts of things you view are critical assets, critical infrastructure areas that you need coverage in your region, in your district. If you can, for the web folks, just go ahead and put that in the chat box. Paul will give me those. And anybody want to hazard a volunteer an area where you need to have FirstNet coverage? Oh, Karen's got one. Go ahead.
When we had our town hall up with the rural area, one of the things that was really important is telemedicine. A lot of what happens in Northern California isn't necessarily near a hospital or urgent care. So one of the things they're hoping for is through the ambulances, be able to get telemedicine to get help quicker to the folks that they're transporting after an accident or whatever may happen.
Thanks. That was interesting. Even just going up to that town hall, talking to the first responders up near Eureka, they have issues in just getting commercial service like on I-5. There's dropouts everywhere. And so FirstNet can actually provide that opportunity because they'll be roaming between networks, and so you'll be able to, maybe you want FirstNet to put that there where the commercial provider wouldn't provide service. Any others that folks want to mention? Oh, go ahead, Barry.
Levi Stadium. The Levi Stadium.
Third time's a charm. I'm sorry about that. We got a big crowd here, and I appreciate that. Especially with the weather, you know, it didn't really start raining until you decided to get in your cars. But anyways, those sorts of events, you just think about people gather. Well, Mike, he'll probably talk more about this, but he's at the Fusion Center here. He was talking about how, you know, guaranteed at a sporting event, when there's the big play, everybody gets on their phones, and the wireless cameras go dark because they're on that same infrastructure. We need that separate dedicated network, and we need coverage in those kind of big areas. Also, recurring events. The one I like to give is in Nevada. We got Dick Mergen here, who's very familiar with Nevada. Is like Burning Man. You know, you heard about the Burning Man Festival set for, you know, a couple weeks in August, anyways. There's 70,000 people that gather in the middle of a desert, and the rest of the time is just a desert. Those areas also need coverage, and so we'll be talking about how FirstNet plans to provide that coverage in those recurring events. And those also include, they don't have to be rural, they can be urban too. Rose Bowl Parade, just had the Chinese Lunar New Year up in San Francisco. There's just all sorts of those sorts of recurring events. I need to be on slide mode. There we go. Let's talk about that network. Get this thing built. I'm building off of the infographic that is actually, there's posters that we have off on the side here. We'll talk more about it, but be sure to bring one home, give it to your administrator, have it posted by the coffee pot or on the bulletin board, because it's kind of the soup to nuts of what you need to know about FirstNet. This is how they're going to build it. TJ will talk more about this, but they're going to first start, it's a cellular network, so it has a core. There's a set of computers that are running real time, and they're redundant and they're diverse. They'll put them in the United States, link them up with fiber optics, and that'll be the place where you're going to get all your connections to start your data connections, to get your security, to get your authentication, get your billing. All that happens first. So they're going to build that first before you can get connected. The next thing will happen, as Karen mentioned, is people opt in, the governors opt in, states start building their radio access network. This looks the most like today's radio access network, excuse me, the radio access network looks as most today as like the land mobile radio. So you've got towers, you've got antennas, and once you hook those up, then you got cell coverage. Now the thing is as you saw, you can't put that everywhere all the time, and particularly for the amount of money, and you wouldn't really want that many towers everywhere. So what they're doing is they're planning a hybrid. They're planning a 3-in-1 network. We're going to have hybrid technologies, and that will include things like satellite communication. So as you move out away from the LTE coverage, you may get picked up by satellite. And for those farthest reaches, they'll use that, you saw that truck roll in there, deployables, cell-on-wheel types of technologies where literally the network will follow, they'll go with you as a first responder. Taken together, this will be what we'll see as the first responder network for the US and for California. Okay, let's talk some of the tactical level things, tactical, practical aspects in terms of governance and how we're structured. At the federal level, there is, as we alluded to, a FirstNet board made of representatives from the municipalities and cities, the states, the law enforcement, fire, emergency medical, commercial telecommunications. Sue Swenson is right now the chairman of the board. TJ Kennedy runs the FirstNet organization in the Department of Commerce. He'll be coming here and speaking with us. He's the head of what's right now a 100-person organization. They're basically a wireless data provider within the Department of Commerce. So it's like a startup company, except for it's in your US government. In California, we have a similar organization in that we have what's called the CalFIRN, the California First Responder Network Board. I'll show you a little bit of the representation, but part of the act said that each governor had to identify a single point of contact for the state for FirstNet to interact with. Karen Wong is our state point of contact in the California Office of Emergency Services. Here's our board today. We've got, let's see, how many board members do we have? I saw Barry there. Barry's one of our CalFIRN board members. Do we have any others to represent today? What we have here is the, as I'd mentioned, kind of the fires, badges, hoses, and bandages. You got law enforcement, fire, emergency medical, plus more. There's a lot of stakeholders in this, including sovereign nations. At the bottom, if you look at the bottom of that list, it includes Cynthia Gomez, who's the governor's advisor for tribal affairs. The committee has advisory committees, and some of them should be really familiar to you. They're like the 911 Advisory Committee or CALSEC, Interoperable Executive Committee. But there's also been some new ones. Last year, there was added the Technology Committee and the Tribal Committee. The Technology Committee actually helped in responding to the RFI. I'll talk more about that. Let's talk about how this all works together. So you got FirstNet, you got Karen, you got the board, you got us. What happens is FirstNet will be communicating through this just like this town hall meeting here and getting the word out about what's happening, what needs to be done. And then we communicate through that same structure in terms of informing FirstNet what it is that we need. What I'd like to do now is just for a second talk about not the future, but what is happening right now. What we have is the Los Angeles Interoperable Communications Systems Joint Power Authority, or LA-RICS. They received funding prior to FirstNet to build an LTE public safety broadband network alongside as they were upgrading their land mobile radio system in LA County. And we're talking a substantial build here. We're talking 4,000 square miles of coverage. We're talking supporting over 80 public agencies and 34,000 first responders. Now, just to put that into perspective, our friends to the north in Oregon, the entire state has about 20,000 first responders. Not only do they have a fairly robust challenge ahead of them, they have a very short time frame. The grant monies were actually provided, like I say, before FirstNet, so it's a 5-year grant that's expiring this year. So they need to build this between now and the end of the summer. To date, they've got 5 sites up, those close to 200. They've got, like, by the end of last month, it was like Friday, they should have about 25 more under construction. You can actually see this one here. Those are the monopoles that they're coming up in the state. And they'll be doing about 35 to 45 of them month to month from here on out. This one completed, it's going to be a $175 million network that will be the largest in the nation in terms of public safety broadband prior to FirstNet coming into being. All right, let's pick back up on that road. What are we doing today? Well, as I mentioned, there's funding separate that has to do with getting the word out, and that's some of the things that one of the reasons why we're here. There's a lot of materials that has been produced by the Office of Emergency Services core team. You got them there on the table. I'll provide you information on how to get that on the net, as well as contact phone numbers. What we'll be doing going forward is, let me click on this here. Here's kind of the process. What we've got is, and TJ will talk more about this, but they're building the network using an RFI, RFP process, just like you would normally, and they did the RFI last fall. So this month, into this month, they'll be sending out a draft RFP for public comment. Industry will be responding to that, and then they hope to take those inputs and then have the RFP come out for response towards the third quarter this year. Inputs to that come from, well, first, this education outreach. You got to tell people what it is you need from them and what you're going to build, and then the second piece is to get their information. That includes the PSAC, Public Safety Advisory Committee. That's a advisory committee similar to some of those that I'd mentioned, but it happens at the federal level. We have representatives that then respond or actually advise the board, FirstNet board. Here's us in the middle. Last year we had preparatory workshops that were delivered by the Department of Homeland Security, kind of like a prequel to this consultation that FirstNet will be doing. We're right now doing the outreach, basically letting everybody know we've got a lot of first responders with a lot of a stake in this, so we want to make sure that everybody gets counted and gets their inputs in. What will be happening, though, next will be this process. It's really an iterative design process. By law, FirstNet's required to consult with states when they design the network. And so that consultation that Karen mentioned in June is that process, first part of that process. They're going to be asking us about how many users do you have today? What are they doing? The sorts of questions that we talked about earlier. What are the applications that you use? Are they text, which takes very, very little bandwidth, or are they video, which takes a whole lot? They'll take all that information as input, do their traffic studies, do their designs, get that in the RFP, and at the end of the day, come up with a plan that they'll present to the governor, and the governor will opt in and opt out, and opting in, we'll start building that network for us. Okay, here's that road again. As we talked about, we're in that outreach awareness stage, moving into the design and network, getting that RFP out. The first thing that'll be built, just like I showed you on that infographic, is that network core. Once that's built, as Karen mentioned, we'll be going in as the governors opt in and start designing and building the networks that light up this service. Why are we doing that? Well, this is just a big pipe, right, for moving data from one place to another, from an application, a data source, to the end user. And so we'll start after that hooking those up. And one of those includes, for example, next generation 911. We're talking a time frame where that'll be starting to come up. And so, for example, right now you get text to 911, and pretty soon you'll be having the ability to, let's say, text in a photograph of a missing child. Well, today it'll come into the 911 center, and then, well, what do? Well, maybe you pick up dispatch and starts describing it to the to the officer what the person looks like. In the future, that's where FirstNet picks up. We talked about that kind of that seamless thing, and be able to keep pushing that out to the field, that piece of data. Finally, this started in 2012, and it's going to end in 2022 per the Act, and that's at the point the network has to be substantially in operation. Why? Well, at that point, any unused funds, that $7 billion, goes back to Treasury. The GIO assesses FirstNet's performance, and then the FCC decides whether to renew the 10-year lease on the spectrum. So that really behooves all of us to do everything we can to get something going that's a substantially going concern in terms of FirstNet service by that time frame. Okay, you always got to have a call to action. So here's the call to action. What do I need to do? As I mentioned, the getting engaged part is really just learning more about it at this stage. So there is FirstNet.gov has all sorts of information. Some of the flyers that are on the table has videos. It's the national website for this. Town halls like this one, we've had a half a dozen of them now with different emphasis, some 911, some emergency medical, some fire. You can get those on YouTube. You can pull that link or just search for California FirstNet town halls and they'll all come up. If you would, with that knowledge, then start informing the folks around you. Let other people know, your peers, subordinates, as these opportunities come up. The next one that's for, definitely going to be happening is that consultation. Everyone's invited. And you can also get information and have any questions answered, things like that, from the emailing or using the phone number there that's on the screen. And then finally, like I say, there's this opportunity that's going to be going forward in terms of the consultation. Make sure you know who your rep is so you get that input into that network design that you need. Last thing is I'd like you to help us manage expectations. One thing I didn't mention too much explicitly, but implicitly, is this is not a replacement for land mobile radio, for that push-to-talk voice. Mission critical voice is going to be here at least for the duration of my career. And so what you want to do is let folks know that no, if they're asking, hey, do I not have to fund you for that next LMR upgrade? You say, yes, you do. This is separate. This is for data, and it's going to be that complementary service. As we had mentioned, it's going to be doing wonderful things. If you just think what you did with your smartphone 5 years ago, if you had one, versus what happens today, and if you're my son or daughter, well, you eat, drink, sleep with the thing. It just is part of your life. So will it be with the network that we'll be providing for our first responders. With that, what other questions do we have? Yeah.
So one of the questions that I have is that if the network is supposed to be operational by 2022 at a nationwide capacity, technology is going to rev multiple generations in that time. So is part of the plan to incorporate or to be open-ended towards the technology and keep up with the evolution of it?
Thank you. We were just talking about that question before we started, huh, Juliet? What is happening is FirstNet's going to be something that's different than an LMR build. Oftentimes, if you get money to fund an LMR, a land mobile radio build, you get a grant money from the feds, you build it, And then you have to worry about, how do I upgrade it? You know, there's money to build it, but then how do I maintain it and keep it going? FirstNet's built to be sustainable. So it's built on a carrier model. Today, you know, before there was, before 4G in Verizon's network, there was 3G and 2G, and they built that into the fee structure of the network. They're doing the same with FirstNet. So as they do the business model for how much this will cost to folks, they're going to include the upgrade to the future 5G or even those point types of releases. Let's see, I see a question here. Will this be all new cell towers across the state, or will they be using existing locations? The FirstNet build, part of the law also says that they have to leverage existing infrastructure. And so FirstNet will definitely do that because, as Karen mentioned, there's not nearly enough money in the $7 billion to build this nationwide. I mean, Verizon alone spent $9 billion just upgrading the existing network to 4G, and we're building from scratch if we were going to do it that way. Instead, what will happen is they'll leverage infrastructure, and it'll be existing not only public safety type towers, but probably primarily ones that already have like an LTE type structure, like commercial cellular towers. So there's going to be a lot of partnership with the commercial folks. If you think about it, if you were to take a land mobile radio tower that's way up on that mountaintop and put an LTE antenna on it, that's got that 1 to 5 mile range instead of the 20 mile, well, you'll light the top of the mountain, that's about it. What they need to do is they need to put it where people are, or where closer to the ground, basically. So when you see a cell antenna for, like commercial service, lots of times it's low. You see maybe even on the side of a building. So they will be using, in short, that the existing infrastructure wherever possible. Other questions? Paul, anything else on the web? All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we're going to move over to the agenda with Joe Wassel to go over the collaboration between state and federal partners.
Great, thank you very much. So thank you, Karen. Thank you, California. Thank you, FirstNet. This is just a great opportunity. I'm always reminded, especially when I come out to California, that, I was born, I don't mind telling you how old I am. I was born in 1965, and so one of my favorite shows growing up was Emergency. I think in syndication for some of the younger folks, it's Emergency 1, and then for folks that just think I'm a dinosaur, just Google it. You can YouTube it. But, these guys are going out. I watched the pilot just a few months back, and it was almost unwatchable. How unsophisticated this little box was with a radio antenna calling Dixie McCall back at the hospital. So there I am, 8, 9 years old, watching this show and just fascinated every night. My dad watched Hee Haw from 7 to 8, and then I got to watch Emergency from 8 to 9, then it was off to bed. So then I joined the Air Force and spent a career basically doing warfighter communications for deployed troops, and then senior leadership communications, keeping our senior leadership as connected and situationally aware as possible as they travel around the globe. Ultimately, as the director of communications for 4 secretaries of defense, and traveling around and trying to use commercial services, mill services, whatever services were available, to make sure that the big decision makers had all the information and all the connectivity they needed to be able to exercise their roles and responsibilities. So it is a bit of a switch for me, although I will tell you operationally, it's just a different spear, a different tip of the spear. It's the tip of the hose, or tip of the gun, or tip of the needle, if you will, for the first responders across the country. So it's just a great opportunity to take warfighting communications out of all my briefings and put first responder communications in all of my briefing, and then find out where the relevance is. So why did I want to come here today? And I was back here in December, and be careful if you're talking with Karen, because if you come up with anything or say anything, you literally can see the light bulb over her head, and she will immediately look at Sue and go, Sue, this is what I want to do. And nobody can pull this off in 60 days the way Karen and Sue and the team and Juliet and the gang have. So why is the department here? Well, I'm the single point of contact for the Department of Defense, and we've got first responders. And I'm going to go through a couple of slides. I really hope there's some questions or comments, or it's just information sharing as we kind of talk about how are we partnering across the nation as first responders. And I inherited 4 years ago the question, well, does DoD have any first responders? Will you be on FirstNet? And that was a really interesting question to drive us to where we are. And we have a long way to go. We're in the consultation phase as well. We have so state by state, and it's so great to hear that you're going across and doing the consultation phases with the other states. I hope to go to a state consultation as well and make sure that we're up to the task when FirstNet comes calling to DoD and the other federal partners to make sure that we're ready to answer the questions that need to be answered to go out and build the best network possible. So there we are. I got this from the National Guard. It's one of my favorite slides. And what's missing from this, of course, is that our territories as well. And so we're going to get that fixed. I'm going to use a FirstNet slide to make sure I got the bottom in there with American Samoa and Guam and whatnot on there. Next slide, please. So, information sharing is key here. And there's a program manager for information sharing environment, Shmender Paul, and he's part of this big federal effort of information sharing. And when you break it down, that's what it's really all about. Very interesting that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, when he was thinking about his visionary document, white paper on the joint information environment, pulled out specifically not just a warfighting capability, but whether we're supporting a hurricane relief. And then finally, if DoD, our first responders have to be interoperable with other first responders, and FirstNet, it is in our best interest that it works. So we are here as a partner, the three-legged table, the states, of course, the local, territorial, and tribal within the states, and then the federal aspect, and then FirstNet. And if any one of those legs of that three-legged table come out, it's not going to work the way we want it to. So we're here to say we are dedicated to make sure that, to the extent that we can, to make sure California is successful, that FirstNet is successful, and of course California is helping us be successful, and vice versa. So off we go. Next slide, please. So you think about DoD, and you got the hurricane hunter. He goes out in there. You've got the massive responses. You see the tanker aircraft. Of course, not all of these are DoD. These are shared responsibilities across the federal and state. But if you see something on here, DoD is playing a part, and that's the traditional part that you think about. What you don't think about are the numbers associated with this, and are they first responders? And so what we have is we have 5th Army outside San Antonio, Texas, which is in support of NORTHCOM, always supporting FEMA. DoD is almost never the lead. We are the supporting agency, the supporting department within the U.S. So we've got 380,000 soldiers in 5th Army that will do everything from fill sandbags to chop trees down, or you'll see here in a second what the National Guard folks are doing. Next slide, please. We also have the National Guard, and it's a really interesting capability in the nation. They are state employees. They are your partners 95% of the time. Only 5% of the time are they federalized, where they do the Title 10 versus the Title 32 activities. When we do federalize them, the majority of the time is to give them federal VA and medical benefits, not to create some sort of command and control structure. It's usually for benefits reasons. And the picture up top is literally, so this state, that's the Boston Marathon. And if that were the video, which we've got, the dust is still going up when those guys are in there trying to help out the first responders. Then I asked one of my colleagues, well, let's just go on the web and see what else is out there. So we found the firefighting. This is the 143rd Air National Guard. I didn't get a chance to get the captions on here, but I will tell you the one on the left, that's last week in Boston. 200 Humvees with 4 people in each Humvee digging out fire hydrants, right? So as state employees, right? Are they first responders? So the next slide. So we stood up, next slide please. We stood up a working group in the department to try and answer this question. And so we'll just kind of talk, we're going to add up all the numbers for you now. So within the Department of Defense, we have 404 major camps, posts, stations, and bases we call installations. Beyond that, we've got armories and then fence lines. Where we were, and I was really glad that Michael mentioned critical infrastructure, or perhaps it was Karen mentioning critical infrastructure. If it's a place we would have to respond,
to, then you've got to be able to have communications there as well. So we have those same concerns. So in these installations, you could say, well, DoD is their first responders, but other than the National Guard and Fifth Army, you guys are inside your fence lines. And then we found out, and we have about 10 piloting bases and, to try and understand how we do business, that at these camps, post stations, and bases where we have fire departments, police departments, ambulance service and hospitals, and also engineering for public works, which is something we just realized in the last week or so, that there are mutual aid agreements. So my wild example is that if Popeyes were on fire outside the fence and we could get there first, we'd go put the fire out and the locals would come up and take over the job, and then we'd go back inside our fence line. But I will tell you, highly publicized, the Navy Yard situation that happened just 18 months ago, and I was just there 2 weeks ago for their 18-month report out. The incident commander for that inside our fence line, when he came out to get some air, realized there were 1,000 first responders outside our fences trying to get in to help us. And in some cases, they were literally over our installation, picking people off rooftops. And communications were less than optimal. So we have an incredible challenge. We have an incredible opportunity to try and take this interoperability issue that we're all dealing with day in and day out, and try and embrace FirstNet and kind of see where it's taking us. So that's DoD by the numbers. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So this is a FirstNet slide, and I don't know whether TJ is going to put this one up or not, but these challenges that FirstNet have identified through through groups like this, and I would highly recommend if there's going to be a PSCR, Public Safety Communications Research Lab, annual conference. I believe it's in your state this year in San Diego in June. That's where they have breakout sessions. That's where these kinds of slides come up with, and there's not a single thing on this slide deck for the states that and you can see some people writing some things down. I believe my slides are completely shareable as well, so feel free to. And this is also on the FirstNet website. So we share all the same concerns. To include encryption. A lot of times, it's my number one question is, is DoD going to encrypt this with type 1 encryption, secret, top secret, that sort of thing, and not for public safety communications. We're going to partner and understand encryption that is necessary, and we are going to sit at the table and have that discussion for public safety communications as well. So we will not be insisting upon that. That's the number one question I've got. Next slide, please. So we have a questionnaire, part of our consultation phase as well. And to get DoD leadership and federal government leadership really interested, all you have to do is start talking about money and then put a B in front of it. And when you're talking billions of dollars, you will get somebody's attention. And with the size of the numbers that we have in the department, so let me go back and add that up. So inside our fence lines, we are uncertain. I do not have the compiled number of how many police officers there are in the Air Force. Believe there's about 35,000. I don't know what the number is for the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Army, but I'm working on those numbers now. Data calls are, when we got 3.24 million folks in the department, it takes a little while to get these numbers back. So this is an example of what FirstNet would like us to fill out. So I'm trying to get the numbers for inside the fence lines. I do know within the National Guard I have 380,000, and in Fifth Army I've got about 380,000. So it looks like we've got about 700,000 plus first responders in the Department of Defense within the U.S. And the next slide, which is the one my leadership really likes, the Air Force realizes, and they're standing behind their number, that $1.2 billion in land mobile radio over the FIDUPs. That's a 5-year period for us. What I did is I took that number, then you'll see the approximation in front of the Marine Corps and the Navy and the Army. And if you take in cellular, of which I have no data, I have no departmental data for how much we're spending for cellular services, cellular and data services currently. We've got to figure out how to do that. Spread across tens of thousands of contracts. So the hope and the question I'll have for TJ, and it's better to ask him when he's not here, is how might FirstNet help me from a contractual perspective, right? What is that billing going to look like? how will I get a better view of what's happening in the department as people switch on to FirstNet and I get some sort of central billing capability and try and get down to some contracts. I will tell you, I've heard TJ enough times, the hope here is if these numbers work out and I have $1 billion worth of decision opportunity on an annual basis for LMR and commercial services support, that's very, very interesting. And I've heard TJ enough times say it's got to be a better capability, which we're working to make sure that it is, and at a better price point, which we will have to make sure that it is. And if I can save some percentage off what I'm saving now and get a better capability, then we're all in. And as I stand here and look at you and you're looking at me, it's like we're all taxpayers, right? And so with the kind of numbers we're talking about for the Department of Defense, we've got to save taxpayer dollars. I don't want to spend a nickel more for something than we have to. And I want a better capability. The Boston bombing, great briefing from the state of Texas. Some great data about what happened in Boston after the, I won't talk about it now that he's here, but TJ can, hi TJ. But after 46 seconds after the 2 bombs went off, cellular service was overwhelmed. And so we just we have to do better than that. I was at the Pentagon on 9/11 and I was shoving phones in my pocket, hoping that they would work when Secretary Rumsfeld wanted to go out to the crash site, which was not a great idea. But we went there anyway. It was the right idea. And we couldn't keep them connected while we were out there. So we went back into a burning building and got on the Defense Red Switch network because all the 4 phones I had, hoping I'd get one from a couple different services, of course, were just no good to me. And then Arlington County shows up. The Pentagon doesn't have a fire department. It does have a police department, a really good one. But it doesn't have EMS services either. And so Arlington County was the response, and they're the response now. And so we have a great opportunity within the Department of Defense to be a federal microcosm of what's happening here in your state. We have prisons, we have elementary schools, we have universities, we have hospitals, we have police, fire, EMS, public works, and on and on and on. And when we send troops over to Liberia, which we did a few months ago, there wasn't great cell service there. And there certainly wasn't LTE, so we took it there. So we took something called Jolted Tactics, which is a joint development capability for our warfighters, and I have connected our J6 lab for that capability and connected it with the FirstNet lab up in Boulder, Colorado. Because what we can do is we can share information. We can share a lot of information. And we want to be helpful, and FirstNet's success is our success, and California's success is our success with our 34 major installations here and the partnerships that we're going on every single day. Although I've not sat with an installation yet for this purpose in the state of California, I am shocked and surprised and pleased every time I hear an Air Force base or an Army installation tell me we sent a canine unit outside the fence. We put a fire, we assisted with a fire downtown. We, and on and on. We had an air show with 200,000 people, and we opened up to the 6 counties around us, and they came in to help us manage this, what should be a very fun day. But 200,000 folks in a tight spot is always challenging. So billions of dollars, improved capability, cost savings, partnership, interoperability, and ultimately life-saving communications. I loved, and I wasn't going to tell you how old I was, and I wasn't going to tell you about emergency until I saw Michael's video there with the ambulance information going back and forth. And if Roy and John had that back in 1975, man, that'd have been something. But that was another show. That would have been like some sort of science fiction show. I won't go into all those. So I just wanted to let you know your problems are my problems are your problems, and the way we can solve them is to share information and work together and come out to efforts like this and make sure that you know that we're with you, and we're not going to try and encrypt this thing up, and we're not going to stand back and watch. I think they're talking about changing some of the language. There's no opting out here. It's only opting in because this is a risk worth taking. Risk is very small compared to what we're dealing with from an interoperable challenge across the nation. So DoD is in, and we are excited. And let's see if I got one more slide to help me get off stage here. So Public Safety Communications Working Group, I have all 4 services, the Joint Staff, Northcom, the National Guard Bureau. Every month we sit down and we work with the same kind of issues you guys are dealing with here in the state. And then as we compile the data, and this slide presentation doesn't look anything like it did 6 months ago, we're doing a spiral development and trying to understand ourselves so we can inform and we can understand ourselves and move forward. Okay, so this is all I wanted to call out. So tech exchange is something we feel a responsibility to do. We're going to share every ounce of information that we've got from a warfighter comms perspective and make sure that it's relevant, and TJ will decide if it is or it isn't, but we're going to open our doors and we're going to share the information. It is available. The other thing is that we are doing an assisted acquisition where we are trying to help with the RFIs and the RFPs through our Defense Information Systems Agency. But it takes a while to get these agreements in place. Quite frankly, early on, we could do better. The department could do a better job moving a little bit quicker. We need to be more agile. The technology is here, the need is here, and we've got to be agile and respond to these things in a way that's helpful to FirstNet, who is kind of building the airplane while they're flying the airplane while they're trying to do the mission, to use that analogy. Next slide, please. And then ultimately, implementation planning. If California goes to FirstNet, and I don't go with you, then I don't really know what that means for interoperability. And I don't know. So that's the challenge. That's the call to action, Mike, that you were talking about. I don't know. Right? Maybe it'll be fine. I doubt it. We shouldn't assume that. So we have to know more. And so we'll come out. I'll steal some of Michael's slides. Absolutely going to steal some of Karen's slides. I've already stolen TJ's slides. And we have the last thing I want to say is that I'm the co-chair of the Federal Consultation Group, which is 14 to 20 departments and agencies, along with Chris Algiers from FirstNet and Marcia McBride from Commerce. And we sit and talk about this kind of like we're a state. And who knew that the Department of Labor had a quick response force to go down into mines and help first responders and try and understand mine catastrophes, and they become first responders? Had no idea. There are so many fascinating things about this country that we're doing to try and protect our citizens. It's mind-boggling. And so we want to share those sorts of things, and you've got those kind of capabilities here as well. And, every time I'm watching the news and I see another storm or I see another outage or whatever else, I just see the hope of this new capability that's coming. And now that he is here, and I would have said even if you weren't here, TJ, but the great leadership that TJ is providing in the team that he is building, this is definitely a place we want to go, and we want to go together. Last slide, I think, is a Navy fire truck. There you go. So yeah, we got first responders in the Department of Defense. I hope you've got some stories of where you've partnered with DoD, whether it's been in the Guard or one of our installations, and I hope it's a good news story. But if you've got any questions or comments, I'd be glad to take those now. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Real quick before we take a break, what I wanted to share is Joe and I started talking 2 years ago? About 2 years ago. And every time we talk, we find more and more areas that we can collaborate. And I'm always excited as much information and resources he brings to the table every time we talk. Almost 3 years ago, right after FirstNet was signed into law, all the states came together. We were brought together in a meeting in Virginia, and I think it was about June. And one of the questions all of the states were asking each other is, where are the federal government? Where's the DoD? Where's our federal partners? And it was a question that really didn't have an answer. And so I can't tell you how excited I am to see the federal government come, whether it's the DoD or our federal governmental agencies, all through Joe, come to start working with us. We can't do any of this as a state-by-state type of an initiative. And I know TJ knows this. Without the federal government, we really won't have interoperability. And the more states that I go and I talk to, especially as I go to their consultation meetings, what we're really learning and what this network brings to the table is it's not going to be about the state's borders anymore. You're not going to have to worry about when you cross the border, who you can talk to. Northern California's problems are Southern Oregon's problems. And we find that more and more the lines of the states are blurred when it comes to this network, which means we really will have a national interoperable public safety network that all of you will be able to use. So with that, we're going to take a break, come back in about, Juliet, 10 minutes? Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. So it's always good to be after the break. Can you hear me now? It's a play on a cellular commercial. I know earlier this was gone over a little bit, so I won't go into depth on it. One of the things I want to make sure we do over the next hour or so is have a bit of a conversation. I don't want to hopefully be lecturing on slides up here, so really looking forward to good questions. I see some familiar faces and lots of new faces in the room. I'm a former state trooper, former firefighter and a paramedic. I'm a state and local guy, currently supporting FirstNet as its executive director, but the real key here at the end of the day is providing a network to police, fire, and EMS. And Joe and DOD, just up here, obviously huge partners, as well as all the other federal law enforcement and other agencies that support state and local agencies across the country. But the largest group of public safety first responders we plan to serve are city, county, special service district, small agencies. There's over 1 million volunteer firefighters that we hope to serve with this network, in addition to all the paid professional agencies and others that are out there. So from a perspective of who the network is here to serve, it's to serve absolutely everybody in public safety who wants to partake in the network. Our goal with having the funding now coming in from the AWS 3 auction being fully funded in the construction fund, which is the $7 billion that you see listed up there, is really just a key first step in the funding mechanism. When we look at FirstNet, the larger piece of funding is actually the band class 1420 megahertz of 700 megahertz funding. This is much larger in value over the future than the $7 billion in funding. A lot of people ask us, is $7 billion enough to pay for this network? And the answer is, by itself, no. You have to put both of these things together, both the value of the spectrum and the excess capacity on the network. I had a great question at the break, and I just want to maybe touch on it because I think it's something all of you might have in your own head as well. One of the things when we talk about this network that's very different is to help pay for the network, we need to put in what are called covered leasing agreements on the actual public safety network for that excess capacity. And you say, why would we do that? Well, it's a huge source of revenue that will help pay and keep costs down for funding for the FirstNet network. When I think of the funding for the FirstNet network, there's really 3 buckets. The $7 billion in construction fund funding, the excess capacity on the network, which is the largest piece, and then user fees. The better job we do on that middle bucket, leveraging the spectrum for the excess capacity, the lower the user fees will be. It's that simple. The $7 billion is a fixed amount. Think of it like a large down payment on your house. So you really have to have that excess capacity. The other thing that does is during really big emergencies. Somebody brought up the case of what about a large earthquake here in Northern California, something I'm sure you all think about and have been through probably in most cases. One of the interesting things by having a network built to a much larger capacity is that you're likely to only be using 5 or 10% of that network on a given day. And when a big emergency happens, you'll have the ability through priority and preemption to have access to the entire network. That capacity being built much larger so that when you have lots of first responders coming in from neighboring jurisdictions, you have the state coming in, you have neighboring counties and other service districts coming to help, that now you'll have that capacity during that emergency that you'll need just for that 30 minutes or just for that 3 hours or just for that day if it happens to be that. Ironically, a lot of the really large public safety events that people even talk about don't last in full response mode for more than an hour. They're usually quite short, and they're usually quite focused into a very small area. So having that ability is actually a purposeful plan of FirstNet to be able to do that and to leverage that going forward. One of the other things that I think is really unique about FirstNet, and I just want to talk about it for a minute, is our board of directors and the Public Safety Advisory Committee. The board of directors is made up of 15 very smart individuals who come from very different backgrounds. We have some state and local government with a retired governor, a mayor, a big city mayor, mayor of Houston, Nice Parker, Governor Jim Douglas out of the state of Vermont, and then also some good state and local representation, especially from public safety, police chief, fire chief, EMS chief, and a sheriff, and really trying to make sure that we have a broad swath of public safety represented on the board that interacts with us on a very regular basis. On top of that, we have key experts from the wireless and technology industry, folks who have run big wireless companies across the country, as well as internationally, and folks who have built networks from the ground up. This gives us a very unique group of folks as an independent authority inside of the government, here to help public safety and trying to bring the smartest people that we can to bear for this somewhat complex problem as we look forward to getting this network deployed fairly quickly and keeping it funded in a very unique way. And so to do this is not easy. I'll admit it's quite complex, actually. It's taken a lot of time to get off the ground with some key resources, as well as solving some of the key issues through both RFIs, public notices, and consultation. And through consultation, you'll hear us use that word a lot. This meeting is part of consultation, trying to be out here meeting with city, county, state, other local public safety agencies that serve public safety and the citizens of California, in this case, every day. Consultation also will happen at a state level with Karen and her team in a very official capacity as far as big statewide meetings and other things that will happen with FirstNet. But everything that we do to come out and work together is part of consultation. We also consult with the Public Safety Advisory Committee, which is made up of about 40 public safety associations. So you think of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the National Association of EMTs, all the different groups that typically represent different parts of both public safety and city and county and local government. So these things have all come together to really leverage the spectrum so that public safety can have one network with a core network that is spread across the country, good reliability and redundancy, but have the ability to have it into local communities so that you can choose to buy service or not. We're not here to force anybody to buy service. We have to offer a compelling offering that you want to buy, that has good security, good priority and preemption, public safety app store, all the things that you would want on a broadband network for voice, video, and data. And you can choose to buy the service. No one's here to force it. At the same point, we're not going to have a nationwide network if we don't build this backbone of a network. And when I say build, I really mean deploy. In most cases, we're not looking to go build our own towers. We're looking to deploy on existing infrastructure. And this is part of the speed of deployment part of the Act, is try to deploy as much as we can on infrastructure that already exists. And it tells us to look at what's most cost effective to try to get that done in a fairly rapid sort of way. And so this also means we're not talking about building a network 10 years from now. We're literally talking about going from an RFI to a draft RFP here in the next 2 months. And with that draft RFP, literally getting responses to that, making any changes, and getting to an acquisition. And we'll talk about that in a minute. We're also talking about continuing to do consultation. Every week we're in 1 or 2 different states literally doing consultation. We have meetings like this that are probably 5 or 6 times a week in different parts of the country. So literally trying to spend every day out consulting as much as we can. So I know somebody stole my roadmap slide earlier, but there you go, Mike stole it. Actually, I worked with my comms team to make up this slide, and it's really hard to see. There's a lot of small things on here. Some of these I was just talking about, though I kind of naturally just go into them. When people talk about RFIs, a lot of times people think of that as just a vendor-driven entity, but really for us, because we're doing something that hasn't been done exactly this way before, it was really an information gathering of what kind of vendors, what kind of business solutions, what kind of technology should FirstNet consider. And we have a mandate in our act that talks about being open and transparent. So part of the reason to do RFIs is to be open and transparent and accept those ideas that might come in. Doesn't mean you have to accept all of them, but you need to read them, you need to see what's coming in and be able to know who you want to go work on from a market research perspective to learn more about. And so RFIs have been a good way for us to do that as we move quickly into an RFP, draft RFP stage. The other thing we chose to do, and it was optional, but we thought it was a good thing to do, was we decided to do public notice and comment on some key issues. And we put our first one out in September, and we received comments over about 40 days. We hope to have another one coming out here pretty soon if the board votes on that. And these comments are meant to, once again, be very open and transparent on some of the complex issues that are in the Act for implementation. Congress is quite large, as you know, and there's a lot of stuff that gets put together to make an act of Congress like this and to put this kind of an act in place. Then they ask us to come forward and implement that act. And as part of that, there's a lot of devil in the details kind of things that we have to work through. So a good example from the first public notice was definition of a public safety entity. And you would say this might be pretty simple, but just looking around the room, I can already tell it's never simple, right? So police, fire, and EMS is the obvious. We've often gotten a lot of comments, though, from folks that are even in police or fire agencies, but maybe not frontline emergency operations personnel. I was talking to City of Baltimore recently, and they talked about their canteen truck on the fire side that goes out to large fires or other things and provides food. Something they would want to have communications with, but it's certainly not necessarily their top priority as far as a vehicle or a responder, and it's not necessarily a sworn firefighter who goes out and drives that vehicle. But at the same point, it's an important element to what they have. And what we don't want to mix when we talk about an eligible public safety entity is priority and preemption. That's a different discussion. So in our case, those are all public safety entities that can go ahead and utilize the network. And we'll work through priorities, and that may not be a top priority vehicle. Big police departments sometimes have their own tow trucks, have other support vehicles they have that might not be patrol vehicles or detective vehicles, different officers who are not sworn. And same thing there. It's a matter of whether or not they work with a public safety entity. So long story short, we put a very detailed explanation out. We got a lot of comments to that. I'd say all but about 2 were very positive, and we were very constructively, advised by the ones that weren't completely positive about it and being taken under consideration, and we'll come back out with some more detail. So really important for us to have this very public dialogue to make sure that we're getting input, we're doing it in a way that's very open, and then we can lock that down because it becomes part of the business model. You have to know who are your users to know how many people are likely to be on the network so you can understand the costs of the network. And that's an important piece as we go forward. Another piece that got a lot of good comments was the definition of rural. In the Act, we have a requirement to do rural build-out milestones. The definition of rural is only one piece of that. It's not the actual build-out milestones, which is, I think, the most important piece. But same thing there, we received a lot of comments on that from different parts around the country and different ways to look at it. And I think that's really important because what you think of as rural and what one may define as rural is probably totally different than what your neighbor across the county or somewhere else in the state thinks about rural. About 2 weeks ago, I had Alaska and Hawaii and a couple other states that were all in town talking about rural, and their particular examples of rural are probably quite different than even a lot of California, which has a lot of rural area. But Alaska's certainly got bigger, vast swaths of rural that some places, due to environmental reasons and others, there will never be a cell tower. It's very difficult because of some of the sensitivities from an environmental perspective to even think of putting something in the ground in certain places. So all these things are issues. You guys all understand environmental permitting and the different things it would take to put different sites, which is once again a good reason to look at existing infrastructure as much as possible. But we're going to continue to put out key issues like this that are things that we want to discuss and kind of how we can get input on it to come up with the best network we can in a reasonable amount of time. We talk about second public notice and comment, hopefully coming in the not too distant future. Hope to have a board meeting posted here very shortly to discuss this with the board and put that out. Draft RFP. One of the things, and I'll talk a little more on the next slide, is just the acquisition process. The Act really asks us to do 2 main things: consultation with public safety and an acquisition to acquire a network and get it deployed. These are huge. And that's really understating it when I look at just go do 2 things, but these 2 things are really, really important. So getting to a draft RFP is another way that we can be very open, because a draft RFP allows us to put as much detail out on the street as possible, which means we can discuss the detail with all of you. We can have open discussions with police, fire, and EMS agencies. We can have discussions with county, state, federal officials, because now we don't have information that is acquisition sensitive that only one vendor might see or only certain vendors see at different times. And so by publishing a draft RFP, it actually allows us to discuss it with everybody, not just industry, but also with public safety. And it allows us to get your comments. One of the things you're going to see as we kind of talk through this draft RFP here, hopefully in the next 45 days to 60 days, et cetera, when it comes out, is it's complex. This is not a simple project when you look at trying to cover 3,200 counties, trying to handle the desires of 60,000 public safety agencies and about 5.8 million first responders across the country. And try to figure out how to do that in a cost-effective way and to balance it so that costs are reasonable and rational and the services are very, very good. And also do it with the unknown, that I don't know how many of you are going to sign up for service, 2 years later when that service might be up and running. And so those are really important things for us to kind of talk through in consultation, understand during this acquisition process, and also make sure that we can lock down our costs and our revenues through the acquisition process to get the best result. So that's really where we're headed on the roadmap. I talked a little bit about consultation and the acquisition process. Right now we have about 110 full-time folks who are working on these 2 events. We have another 50 or 60 contractors that are also supporting that, and we have additional folks coming on board just to ramp up consultation even more. And we'll continue to do that over the next year or so. Consultation is not something that has an easy beginning and an easy end. Consultation will continue to occur after an RFP goes out. It'll continue to occur as we deploy a network, and it will continue to occur even after the initial network is deployed and we talk about filling in gaps or adding more capacity or adding new features, because that's something that's going to change over time. One of the great things by leveraging new technology is that we're talking about a network that is recapitalized so that we can upgrade it over time without having to go back for a federal grant to pay for it. This is something that those of us who've been in public safety for most of our career know is not the way we usually do things. So it's a bit different in that we are looking to build into our model that we will recapitalize the network. We will be upgrading to advanced LTE, to 5G, to 6G, and whatever else comes in the future. And that all of you that are out there with a device, that literally you're just advancing to the next new device, or your vehicle is getting the next new component so that you can leverage the new technology that happens to come out. We're not trying to solve the issue of a forklift upgrade and a whole new national network 5 years from now when basically the technology has changed 2 times. You know, every 3 years, this technology is going to change pretty radically. And so our goal is to work and consult with public safety, get it deployed fairly quickly, and get it out there so that we can continue to upgrade it. You can take advantage of all the technology and the changes you're in. I mean, literally in an area where most of the technology changes in this country emanate from. And you should be able to take advantage of that in ways that we probably haven't seen before, which will be terrific going forward. Consultation activities, I really push all of you to go to our website. This is just a copy of our webpage. Once a week, this particular map gets updated. Most of the states have either signed up for consultation or are scheduled for an upcoming consultation. There's a few states that are still working through some issues to get their states to commit to certain dates. But on our website at firstnet.gov, not only can you look at when certain consultations are happening, but also there's tons of other material. There's fact sheets to download for police, fire, and EMS. There's presentations. Most of these presentations are on our website. I kind of come from the old school in public safety, which is kind of counterintuitive for some of us, where I just give it all away. We'd rather just share it all and have everybody have access to the information. So we post just about everything on our website. We make it so it's very available for people to go out and look at. When we have board meetings, we post all the documents on there, all the presentations on there. It really helps industry, it helps public safety. And what I like is there are police officers, firefighters, paramedics on the street who are just interested in what FirstNet is about, and they can go to our website and figure it out. They can go see what FirstNet's actually going to do. And we continue to change it. I'll admit we don't know everything it's going to take to make this network happen. I'm just like one of you. I literally used to be on the other end of the radio, responding to calls, whether it was police, fire, or EMS, and dealing with the fact that I didn't have communications everywhere I needed them. I didn't have the same tools that most 15-year-old kids have today. And you really need to be able to have the capabilities to leverage technology in ways we probably haven't thought of. And so to me, this is a mission that I think we all know we need to have. And we also know that there's probably some police officers, firefighters, paramedics that are young and sitting in their attic somewhere off coding great ideas and new applications and things that will leverage this network going forward. And so to me, it's about getting the network out there and getting the best network we can possibly afford, but also making sure it's sustainable. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about when we work through consultation is everything we do has to be sustainable. If we look at the laundry list of desires or what some people might say are requirements, in public safety, they're probably about this high. They're huge. And then when we talk about what we can afford, it's probably down here somewhere. And for us, it's a little bit in the middle because we have this unique element that we can leverage the excess capacity on the network to do a bit better. But we have to do that to get into that excellent network that we can afford. And that's really what we're driving towards, is to the best possible network that we can afford and we can maintain and we can upgrade and really leverage going forward. So there's a number of elements on here as far as access to information, but I really want to use the rest of my time to kind of answer questions and wander around the room. So with that, who has the first question? Let me see if I can grab a microphone here. There's one back there. All right, it's a quiet group. Barry will. Oh, here we go. Here, front row.
So, Mark Anderson, engineering manager for Santa Clara County. So you described what I felt was really the only way that this was ever going to be able to be built and be sustained, and that is if we partner with the carriers to share that unused spectrum when we're not using it. And so the big thing is what happens if Verizon and AT&T and those carriers don't like the deal that we give them to do that, to overlay their system with our spectrum at their sites, possibly use their backhaul. I mean, we have to give them a pretty good deal in order to do that for us. What happens if they say no?
I think first of all, we need to do an acquisition, right? So the only way to test the marketplace is to do an acquisition, and the more open you're about it, the more they can plan and actually put together a good bid. And my goal is that there's a lot more than Verizon and AT&T bidding on this. You know, I want to see, and AT&T's in the room, so I don't want to pick on them. They're a great company, and I expect them to bid quite well as we move forward. But no, I mean, competition is the main way you get people to give you the best deal. It's long and simple. You want good competition. And so I'm glad to see carriers here today. And I'm also glad for other people besides carriers, you know, who are very interested in making this happen. There's system integrators, there's others trying to play in the core network and different technology vendors that are in the middle. But at the end of the day, carriers can be a big part of funding that secondary capacity on the network that is a huge part of the funding. If you look at the recent auctions, there's certainly a desire to have additional capacity. There's certainly a desire to have good spectrum. And one of the great things for public safety, the spectrum that we have is some of the best spectrum that will become available in a very long time. And so it's in a very good place. It's also great for propagation. I call it the Superman spectrum. It's able to leap tall buildings and go through walls. So it's kind of a good thing when you look at it that way. For AT&T, that just means they have to pay more. That's all. That's a good thing. But it doesn't matter what carrier it is. At the end of the day, we want them to compete so that we can get the best deal for public safety. Barry.
Thank you. Barry Fraser, Bayrix. So you mentioned the rural challenge. Obviously, California, we have a lot of rural areas and a lot of urban areas. Rural is going to be very difficult, especially in areas where there is no current cell service or there may not be towers. You got to figure out some solutions. Mm-hmm. But most of the people here are from a pretty dense urban area. And there's not a week that goes by when you don't hear some news report about where there's been an event or an incident and the commercial service gets congested and goes out, it's not reliable. I guess my question is, when you start building this out, do you see targeting kind of the high-risk, dense urban areas first? What are your thoughts about that?
My thoughts are to ask every state and every public safety group of folks together in that state to prioritize what's most important to them. And it doesn't mean that Karen has an easy job, because she needs to work with everybody in this room and all those rural partners as well. But really looking for the states for input. And when I say the state, I mean everybody in that state who's part of the public safety family who comes to the table for consultation. There are rural voices, there are metro voices, there are suburban voices. There's all those parts across the state. I see LA County sitting behind you there in the room. You know, there's a lot of big urban as well. And the answer is both. But there are priorities and there is going to be timing. I mean, one of the things, if you look at the largest populous counties in the country, the largest number of public safety magically happen to be more or less in those counties. And so you can cover a large portion of public safety by covering the populated areas, but just like there's a capacity problem in populated areas, there's a coverage problem in the rural areas. And so both have a need that's not necessarily meeting everything they need for public safety today. And our goal is to make both better, but to the point we can afford. Scott.
So I figured since Bayrix talked, I guess Ellie Rick should talk.
There you go.
So I just wanted to ask you, obviously we're going to have to share some of the spectrum with the commercial carriers to get that income and offset our cost a little bit. But we're also going to have to roam on their networks where there's gaps in the Band 14 network. We need to roam over onto AT&T's network or Verizon's network during routine data times. So my question is FirstNet going to help us with an agreement with the commercial carriers, or is that going to be left up to the local radio systems?
Yeah, great question. So Commander Edson was really asking about his roaming part of this. One of the nice things is our act implicitly gives us permission to negotiate roaming. So FirstNet, representing public safety does have that ability. Our goal is to push that inter-acquisition as much as possible and to really look at who comes up with the most innovative deal, right? I mean, there's certainly the ability for a lot of these carriers to come forward and offer roaming where it makes sense. The question is, will all of the same rules apply? So as a good example, if we have priority and preemption and all of the things that come with the FirstNet core network, do all of those same features come when you're roaming on the other network? The easy answer is typically no, it doesn't. And so the question is, how will that work? Who will give a better deal than somebody else? Will somebody allow certain things to happen from a priority and preemption perspective? Or maybe not. And maybe it's just about additional capacity and coverage, which becomes a big part of that. But really comes down to the acquisition. This is why when we talked earlier about a lot of folks working on the acquisition, it's complex for these issues. Issues such as roaming versus just Band 14 deployments. Now, in a lot of cases, a lot of the Band 14 deployment will hopefully be on the same site that a carrier's network happens to be. So you would have a lot of the same coverage because a lot of those sites and a lot of that backhaul and other things could be very similar. The question is it all or is it some, and is roaming a key part of that? But we definitely have the ability to leverage roaming.
I got the mic. That's me. Yeah. Just to respond to Mark and to Barry just on a couple things and then one observation. Mark, there are a lot of people in this valley in particular talking about Netflix. You're talking about heavy bandwidth users that are now having to go to other places to get it, not just to rely upon the traditional carriers, although we love our carriers. The truth of the matter is competition, as TJ says, is better, and there's a lot of it for the spectrum because it is prime beachfront property. Now, with respect, Barry, the rural part of this really is a matter of political practicality. TJ is being very polite and politic and doing what he says. The reality is when we went to Congress to get the spectrum, remember the Senate is a rural body. So it's not that they're saying that you can't have urban deployments first. It's just that contemporaneous with that you have to have some touch points out in the rural parts of the country, wherever those may be. And there are some places that are rural that are ready to go. They're really impressive. They've got good leadership and they're going to move forward. My last comment is going to be to Karen's point earlier. I think it was Karen was talking about getting that next generation. They ask to everybody in this room, and I know many people in this room, your younger employees are the ones who are going to be using this. We're the ones building it now, but the truth of the matter is they are so much more sophisticated than we will ever be. We've got young officers coding on their time off, and they're coming up with applications. You need to get this information down to them so that they unleash them. They will come up with amazing stuff that we haven't even dreamt of, and we won't. And we knew that when we started this effort, is to say, look, turn it over to the younger generation, give them that platform, and they'll make it happen. And I'll leave it.
Chief Moore's point is very poignant there in that the reality, I've asked a lot of police chiefs, fire chiefs, others, and I remember back when I started as an EMT and a firefighter around the age of 18 and a police officer at the age of 21, what's the average age of a police officer in your department? What's the average age of a firefighter in your department? And in most cases, people come back with pure averages below 30. Because just the sheer law of averages with attrition and things that happen over time, the reality is it ends up being less than 30. And if we look at people who are leveraging broadband technology today, the reality is they're leveraging it in ways whether you want them to or not. We also did some other anecdotal surveys that were quite interesting, and literally in asking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of police officers, firefighters, paramedics, how many of them carry a smartphone at work? And the answer was nearly 100%. Now, the sad part is majority of them were private cell phones. They were their personal cell phones that they were using. You asked how many of them were doing work stuff on their smartphone, their personal smartphone. Nearly 100%. 100% are using it to Google addresses. 100% are using it to find data, to be able to locate the nearest homeless shelter, to be able to look up a drug that they don't understand the name of or they're not sure what it is. And so the reality of it is they're using them today. So saying that they're not going to use them, I think, is a little bit of a misnomer. They're using them today. Doesn't take anything away from the importance of land mobile radio. Still a very important tool. But the reality is public safety is using these today. And even for me, when I was a paramedic years ago, this is a quite good tool for calling a hospital and talking to a physician and being able to communicate in a nice two-way fashion. And what if you could do that in an encrypted format? What if you could do it where you could record conversations that could be part of better care later on and looking at case reviews and other things for EMS? There's lots of things that we can get and do with the technology that just exists today. Not even going to what might exist tomorrow.
I've got the microphone now. Go
Hey,
ahead.
I've got one too.
One of the things that I'm seeing is assuming that the train ends up into the station and we've got ourselves a nationwide network. What about the user devices? Are we looking at something that's going to look like a cell phone and price like a cell phone? I understand the market's going to drive this. But where are we looking? Are we looking at a $1,000 device? Are we looking at a $4,000 device? And with regards to all the development and everything, well, wonderful stuff. The future is going to take care of itself. But where should we start looking at these devices coming in?
Somebody's already marketing in the room. So here's a Band 14 device that looks a lot like a smartphone today.
This is a lifetime sample, isn't it?
Yeah. So, so Dick, tell them how much the device costs. Or will cost.
Since I'm just a fan of the company and actually not part of it, Sana makes a Band 14 device, about $500–600, absolutely indestructible. Don't care what you do with it.
Waterproof.
It's waterproof. It's everything. One of the things some of you know that Chris Moore and I were part of the leadership of this. We were very concerned about Band 14 devices. Was FirstNet going to have to pay for development, deployment of devices for public safety? And what's happened is the market said, we're important as public safety. And there are people like Sonam today building devices with plans to come out with other devices. They're almost indestructible. And being a Moto fan for many years, this will do things my Moto device wouldn't. It's more indestructible than my Moto device. I ran a public safety shop for quite a while, so there are people doing it today.
I think the broad answer, too, not to take anything away from Dick's good pitch there, which is actually quite good. Do I think that they're going to produce public safety Band 14 smartphone devices that are in the sub-$600 range? The answer is they already are. So that's the good news. The other good news is I think that the market is getting seeded with Band 14 chips. Everybody said it wouldn't happen for years and years and years, and it's already happening. Qualcomm and other major chipset manufacturers are already making it. A lot of devices out there, such as Apple and others, are now carrying 16 and 20 chipsets, multiple antennas, multiple different carriers have multiple different options to be able to leverage Band 14. There's a lot of other band classes with the existing major carriers in the U.S. who can leverage Band 14 without a major forklift. So for a lot of them, if they bid on this, they're going to bid on also putting Band 14 probably in all their devices, or at least most of their devices, which I think is a great thing for this market. You can also take a lot of the routers that many people use in cars today, police cars today and so forth, and put a Band 14 chip in there and be able to have vehicle-borne capability as well. One of the unique things, and we still have to work out some of the technical details, we're working on it now, but also looking at high power devices. So when we talk about rural, it's not just about the power emanating from a cell tower, it's also about the power of the device. And so for some of the more rural areas, high-powered devices and vehicles is also something that will be quite helpful. Somebody who patrolled very lonely highways, certainly aware that high-powered devices will be useful. So there's a lot coming, and I would say, based over just the last 18 months, the amount of advancement on Band Class 14 chips and Band Class 14 devices has gone about twice as fast as I expected. So I think the market is meeting the demand, and it will continue to meet it, and competition will heat up. A good example is even looking at some of the major conferences from 2 years ago to a year ago, the amount of Band Class 14 National Public Safety Broadband Network, FirstNet capable deployables went from 2 to 8 in 1 year. Just looking at different companies and manufacturers who wanted to meet the public safety niche for deployable vehicles and capabilities that would be able to go out into the field. And I guess that the big IWCE conference, which is in a couple weeks, will probably have more because the market is starting to respond to it. The other thing we're seeing is internationally. We're not the only country building a nationwide public safety broadband network. The UK is actually slightly ahead of us. They have a little bit easier problem in that their geography is not nearly quite as large. And they have 3 carriers that are competing for that across their country, which is a good thing. And they're actually in procurement right now. A couple other countries are very eagerly moving quickly into this. If we look at Korea, South Korea is moving very quickly. They have a very aggressive cellular market as well, which is terrific. Canada has set aside the same spectrum, not all of it, but part of the D Block itself, and actually following what we're doing very closely. And 5 or 6 other countries are also starting to dive in now into public safety LTE. So it's not even just about solving it for the U.S. public safety market, the world public safety market needs the same thing. So when we look at carriers and we look at devices, it's also driving that across the country. And you'll see we'll be coming out more to try to push the device market. Our standards bodies with the Public Safety Communications Research Lab that we fund in Boulder, not only are we funding them, our legislation also has another $200 million that's going to go into public safety communications research that will be funded here in the next few months. Huge investment in really trying to drive the device marketplace and the interoperability of what we're doing on a real standards-based, open standards kind of platform. And that particular body also works with us to work with the international standards bodies to make sure that the U.S.'s voice is heard when it comes to public safety devices and what we want to see. Other questions?
So being the manager of an engineering department, part of what we do is service. And we have a full staff of service technicians with vehicles and test equipment and training and all that goes along with that. Building out a nationwide network for public safety then, we would expect that the technical first responders to that system would be of that caliber. And what is going to be the philosophy of the federal government in a nationwide communication system? How are they going to maintain it?
So first of all, we agree. And I think there's a microphone coming to you next from the back row back there. So when it comes to how do you handle maintenance and response across the country, how do you handle deployables when networks go down? How do you handle solving network outages and those kinds of things? First of all, FirstNet's goal from a network operator perspective is the fact that it will be a 24/7 mission critical network. And that anybody who partners with us, anybody who is part of that overall FirstNet team, whether it's done in a state level, whether it's done at a county level that's contracted to support it, whether it's done with private industry supporting us, whether it's done with carriers supporting us in certain elements, all of them will be driven by the very high standards of public safety. And part of the goals of Consultation is to talk about the kinds of elements that we expect to see. And really looking at how do we do this not just at a city-county level, but also at a state level, and also at a state-to-state and a nationwide and region level. So a good example, a couple years ago, I responded up when Hurricane Sandy happened. I was involved with a company that had some major security elements for a couple of big airports in the New York area, and a lot of our equipment was underwater for a period of time, and I went up there, and a lot of the things that happened to the cellular networks was they lost power either immediately or within 24 hours when battery backups and other things went away. And a lot of times we didn't get it back for days or weeks. And this was one of the major concerns about public safety. So if you think of all those, EMTs and paramedics who traditionally use a cell phone to call a hospital, well, if for 2 weeks they have no cellular coverage in the response area, even though a lot of the overall day-to-day mission has come back up, the reality is it majorly changes how they communicate. And it's only become more so if it's a public safety network. So also looking at how are you going to make sure that you have a local response capability, you have a regional response capability, and you're also able to respond from state to state. So a good example at New York City, if you look at New Jersey and some of the neighboring states, they're actually not very far away, in some cases, less than a mile. But in the traditional world, we aren't typically set up with the same equipment and the same replacement equipment and the same response vehicles to be able to respond into different jurisdictions. But we're looking at how we can do that to handle bigger emergencies and the everyday. But long story short to your question is the same level of very high-tech, high reliable response that will be there for public safety. And the way to do that is not easy. You've got to plan for it, you've got to build it, you've got to train it, it costs money. And at the same point, we are paying for this network, right? So we're paying for it up front. We're finding partners to help lower the cost. And then there's also user fees. So the more we demand, the more the price goes up. So we just have to know we're going to pay for what we get. Nothing's free, right? So we've got to do that as well. But I think we can come up with a very excellent network that will actually have some reduced costs compared to some things we have today.
You may have just elaborate a little bit more on if the maintenance is going to be done potentially by locals. Would the installation of the infrastructure also be done? Would that be something that would be given to counties or authorities, or how would the actual management of the project occur in the environmental review, et cetera?
You actually had about 4 questions in there. So environmental review, I'll just kind of push to the side. I'll answer that first. In California, it's unique, so it's different than even it is in every other state. From an environmental review perspective, we're going to follow all the same state and federal laws that are required to be followed. We have a whole NEPA team, and all they do is look at CEQA and NEPA and those kind of elements day in and day out. We also have the National Historic Preservation Act when we go onto tribal lands, which are also geared to be covered by FirstNet. So when it comes to these issues, we have to look at them across the board, and we're looking at some very large environmental impact studies and have actually started the nationwide meetings that have started to occur on purely the environmental front. And so that's a parallel effort that's already started. Separate from that, when it comes to deployment, it's going to be how people respond to our RFP. So one of the things we need to do is we need to make sure that we have an RFP acquisition process that helps us build this network and deploy it, really deploy the network across the country. Different states, different regions, and really get it across the country with understanding that speed to deployment is very, very important. It can't be just something we'll get to later. There will be areas, as you mentioned, that will take a lot longer. There's no doubt about that. And in some cases, there will be synergies and partnerships that will allow stuff to get built probably in an easier way. And in other cases, it will be leveraging different commercial infrastructure, different telecom and other infrastructure, and different government infrastructure where it makes sense. So it's many different options to solve the same problem.
So sorry for my follow-up here then. So if a county said, we're in, we want to build it out, they'll put out the RFP, they'll manage the project, and you'll give them the money?
No. So the way it works right now is we're required to put out an acquisition that covers all 56 states and territories, taking in different types of bids. And we're going to put out a draft RFP, and we want you all to respond, even states, counties, cities, to the draft RFP if you have better solutions that will allow us to be able to maintain speedy deployment, keep costs down, and have a nationwide core network where everyone is interconnected. So come back with specific ideas to that draft RFP, and we will consider them. I'm not going to do a one-off, one-county option today. What we want to do is have the draft RFP and get options given back to us that will help make it better.
I just had a question, because primarily this has been focused on data, video, things like that. I come from a county, San Mateo County, which is just north of us, that all law enforcement is in UHF T-band radio right now, which from what we've been told is going to be going away for us at about the same time this comes online. So the question is, where do we go when our UHF T-band goes away for voice communication? Because on a field level, primarily 90% of the day-to-day communications isn't data, it's voice. It's handheld radios, it's vehicle radios. So how does this play into the voice radio network?
So two separate things, LMR and LTE. So from our perspective, we're planning to deploy with voice over LTE at the very beginning. So we'll have cellular quality voice. We're looking at push-to-talk apps and other things that will be available very early on. Doesn't mean the mission-critical voice standards will be in place. So that would be something that would be more akin to a LMR replacement in the future. Currently, the international standards bodies aren't looking to even put the mission-critical voice capabilities in the standards body until late 2016. So a little over a year from now, year and a half from now. And then manufacturers have to build them into the market, and that includes all different features, group call, emergency call button, all the same kind of features that most of us are used to. So that will take a little bit of time. The current time frame on the T-band is 2022 is when they're looking to, through the Act, have that brought back in. The FCC currently is prioritizing additional channels and narrowband 700 megahertz for current T-band jurisdictions like yours. And the FCC is also going to be working a program for how that T-band will come back in and how it will help pay for relocation. It's something that is separate from what we're doing to build out FirstNet, but it certainly has to be done in coordination. I can tell you the FCC is looking very closely at it.
Just a quick follow-up. The big thing is going to be cost, and that if we're going this way, and then you end up buying new radios, 700 megahertz or whatever, and then all of a sudden, FirstNet's up, we're going to go this way. Well, especially for smaller agencies, the investment in hardware is going to be huge.
Agreed. I think there'll be a lot more in the next year that will help answer a lot of those questions. A lot more coming.
You're talking about potentially millions of devices on this network, hundreds of thousands of users, potentially millions of users.
Millions.
And at some point, these networks will interface to the public internet. And so that creates cybersecurity concerns, both from a internet coming into the network as also within the network. Someone brings in an infected laptop or something onto the network, and now what happens? So the question regarding cybersecurity: who manages it? What policies are going to be enforced? Is it going to be a local management thing? Is it going to be the carriers managing it, whoever's designated the carrier? And then how does that look like right now?
Still being worked on. I mean, this is one of the key elements to actual deployment and operations. We currently are continuing to bring on additional cybersecurity personnel who are looking at key technical and process and procedure elements, working both at the local and the federal level for how this will be laid out. One of the great things is today, ironically, most people are operating on a commercial network in the clear and having to do VPNs over the top and other things. And one of the great things that we're able to do that some others may not be able to do at a network perspective is be able to tie in key databases and other things without going across the internet. And even though there will still be vulnerabilities like there is on any network, we'll be able to have some direct connectivity and some other things that we can do that are unique. Lastly, I think, and one of the biggest issues, and we've actually asked the Public Safety Advisory Committee to help us take a look at this, is really looking at identity and access management. You know, one of the unique things about public safety is we have many, many different departments, 60,000 different police, fire, and EMS agencies across the country. Back in my day, we were planning for the Salt Lake Olympics and some other big events, and we were looking at just credentials and IDs and trying to get everybody to have one ID card. And it's a very unique problem to solve. And so we're looking at it from a network perspective, but there's also human and operational elements. How do you confirm folks work for your agency? How do we look at vehicles that have a device that's shared by multiple people? So if you have a computer in a fire engine and you have 4 firefighters in that fire engine, having different people authenticate and use the same devices. And then you may have many devices for one person. When you look at machine to machine and the kinds of things that are coming in the future, the reality is we're going to have people that have probably more than one connection to the network for different reasons. And so all of these are huge elements related to cyber. There's a lot of good work going on right now. We had a big identity and access management summit a few months back that we looked at a number of these issues. And it's going to be a number of key sessions that need to be held, kind of looking at the different issues that relate to federal, state, and local agencies and how they each want to tackle this. A number of them will be solved at a network level for FirstNet, and there'll be a lot of things that can still be done by state CIOs, city CIOs, county CIOs that are even more strict and more specific to your city, county, or state. And that's how it's often done today. I think we'll be able to bring a whole new level of encryption across the network and some new things that will be even easier to work with and also more secure, but there's still elements that will be controlled at the very local level. Good question. Other questions? One more in the back. Michael.
Thanks. TJ, you had mentioned that they had you had the notice for comment last fall, and had to do with definitions of public safety and rural. And then you mentioned you're going to have a second one. What are the topics that will be covered in that?
It's up to the board of directors. So there's a number of topics coming up, but they really have to discuss and vote on them before I can make a list of what they are. But hopefully that will happen literally in the next couple weeks. So I think it's very, very close. Actually should have a Federal Register notice out today or tomorrow that will announce that call probably even in the next week and a half or so. So as that gets announced, that will get firmed up. We then will also have additional notices that really close down or firm up the questions from the first public notice. And we have a few for some future ones as well. So we're definitely looking at putting a number of elements out there. Just for an example, we had 64 responses to the last public notice. Many of them were from states. I think states were probably 25 of those responses. So a lot of good state input. We had individual public safety agencies in some cases give input, and industry. On the RFI and the draft statement of objectives, which is out there publicly. So if you want to understand how the network gets built, best thing you want to do is look at the statement of objectives. It's a huge part of what goes forward, and that received 122 responses. I think about 87 were from industry and the rest were from state and local public safety agencies. And as we move into the draft RFP, you'll see where these things drove what we're doing in the draft RFP, and we hope to get a lot of responses to that as well. So every time we've put one out, we've received more responses and better responses, so hopefully that will continue to happen. I think it's easier as things become more and more concrete. It gives people good things to discuss during consultation, and it also allows us to get more finite in refining our approach. So looking to have all your input please go ahead and respond to that, both at the agency and the state level. I'm sure Karen will rally some troops for some responses as well. And we definitely encourage both tribal and other responses from across the country and hope to get a lot more as we come out with that. Another question over here by the wall.
So basically a comment, John Schmidt, California Department of Transportation. You mentioned there's challenges to covering rural areas. There certainly are, but I did want to let you know that in California you might have a little bit different situation in that the Department of Transportation has already built 700 megahertz infrastructure on about 95% of the rural highways in California. So hopefully that's something you can leverage.
Definitely want to leverage it. One of the great things, the Act does let us leverage government infrastructure for exactly those purposes. And one of the things when you look at a lot of the rural areas, rural roads are one of the biggest issues. Some of them are federal highways, some of them are state highways, and some of them are county roads or smaller. But the reality is that's where a lot of the population in rural areas lives, is along those roads and highways and byways. And it's really important that we get as much coverage as possible and leverage it, especially when it comes to leveraging infrastructure. The rural areas are going to be the area where that happens the most. It's just logical where that's going to be needed. Also, when I hear DOT, I always go back to the public safety entity definition. One of the examples we often use is the State Department of Transportation emergency highway responders that typically are at every accident scene and helping the California Highway Patrol and others, direct traffic around big accidents and other things that happen out on the highways, good weather and bad. Those are often used as an example where it's not a traditional police, fire, EMS entity, but they probably want to have access to the network and be able to communicate with the traditional police, fire, and EMS that are responding to those incidents. And so we often list those in that description as something that is part of the public safety broader definition that we put forward. So when you see that out there, that's one of the normal examples we often give. Other questions?
I have one.
Go ahead,
I
Karen.
get asked all the time.
Sure.
So I'm going to have
You're
you
gonna
ask.
pass it off to me.
Yes, I am. If the stars line up like we'd like them to, and knowing that 2022 is coming up quickly, when do we think that we'll have a network out that will be usable for public safety?
I'll give you an unsatisfying answer. It depends. And it really depends on the two things that I talked about at the beginning, consultation and the acquisition process. So we're working through consultation in a heartfelt and a dedicated way, but also it takes time, as you probably know as well as anybody. It's how many counties in California? 58. So 58 counties and many city and other agencies and special service districts and private ambulance services and DOTs and others who all want to interact. And so we need to work through that. At the same point, we want information coming in from consultation before the RFP and even after the RFP as we move towards deployment. Need to have it both before and after. And we need to work the acquisition process. And for anybody who's worked on acquisitions even at the state or local level, they take some time. We hope that by being really transparent and putting out draft statement of objectives, in September, so 5 months ago, almost 6 months ago, by doing that there's been a lot of good comments, a lot of transparency in that. By putting a draft RFP out, we'll get a lot more comments, and by the time we get to a final RFP, we've worked through a lot of the issues. At the same point, once you have an RFP in any process, you have the risks of protest and other things that you don't necessarily control the time frame on, but you need to work through that. The good news when it comes to deploying cellular networks and deploying 4G LTE networks is that they can be done fairly quickly, especially if you're leveraging existing infrastructure, not building greenfield new sites. If you're leveraging existing infrastructure, there are states that are in a more envious position. Let's talk Delaware, 3 counties, right? So there are smaller states and smaller build-outs that could be done in a quicker fashion. So you might say Delaware takes 9 months. California is going to take a lot longer. It's just a reality of the geography and the size and the scope. At the same point, the more agencies leverage local infrastructure, and depending on how the bids come in, the more teams that are out deploying across the country at the same time, different regions of the country at the same time. We have a speed to deployment clause. Our goal is to go out and deploy as quickly as practical, not without costs being a factor. They have to be a factor. But one of the great things about having important capacity and spectrum is it only becomes really valuable if you use it. So you have to deploy it and get it out there. So we're going to be motivated, and we hope that our bidders will also be motivated to get the capacity out there and get it up as quickly as practical, which will be important. You can bring in Mike.
When you talk about the acquisition process, and you're talking about an RFP that's coming out, are you discussing multiple vendors or a a bid for a single nationwide vendor?
Both are still options at this point.
Okay. So in terms of the speed to market, I'm still thinking about Cal Fire's question. In terms of the resources that agencies already have, how do you contemplate that the existing infrastructure in the mix? In other words, it seems to me, as I listen, very top-down, like we're going to do this and we're going to acquire this, instead of people have a lot of resources that and infrastructure that they already have. And they don't necessarily want to go to a carrier if you already have your own poles or cell sites or whatever. So.
And so the key is going to be speed of deployment and cost, right, and doing that at the same time. And I don't know, Scott, if you want to, or anybody wants to speak about LA RICS, just some of the challenges sometimes even with infrastructure that you have. Yeah, let's pass the mic back.
I'll give it to him.
No, I think it's important because, you know, I got to tell you, as somebody who's a former public safety guy, I always thought that it would always be easier or cheaper to do on public safety or firehouses or things like that. And there's other quirks when it comes into this. So I don't know, Scott.
Sure. So that's what we decided to do. Most of the 200-plus sites that are being built in Los Angeles are going to be built on city fire stations, county fire stations, and also sheriff stations and police departments. We did run into a little bit of a union issue with some of the firefighters believing that too much radiation is going to be emitted off of the towers. So we're going through some of those issues right now. But with regards to infrastructure, you know, LA RICS, maybe you need to talk about this too a little bit. You know, we're an early adopter. So we're building without, you know, in consultation with the state and in consultation with FirstNet. So a lot of things that we're building today, you're going to learn from. There's a few sites that are early adopters, and you'll all learn from that. So I think to answer your question, I think there's going to be a combination of using some existing infrastructure that you're going to identify in consultation with the state that's going to respond to a lot of FirstNet opportunities. And there's going to be new opportunities where we have Motorola coming in and building new infrastructure for us as well. So there's going to be quite a bit of mixture. But I think the early adopter is probably something you should touch on.
Yeah, I mean, just to highlight what Scott said about early adopters. Right now there are 5 projects out there that are kind of early builder projects. They're not what I would call a mini FirstNet, because to have a core network nationwide and to have the interoperability, you have to have the core across the country. So that's not something that will exist until FirstNet starts to deploy. But these projects are all very different. LA RICS is one example. Barry's here with some of the stuff that was done early on with Bay RICS. But when we look at the other 4 that are still out there today, Harris County, Adams County, Colorado, State of New Mexico with a small initiative, southern part of New Mexico, and State of New Jersey with a deployable network. They're all very different efforts. Some of them are 8 sites, some of them are 30 sites, some of them are 16 sites. LA is the largest one out there, but I think it's a few sites less than initially hoped for. And these are just the practical realities. The good news I can tell you, we're learning lessons, good and bad, from all these early projects, but they are, you know, showing us some, you know, apparent delays that come up with taking different methods of looking at this, and we're taking all those lessons learned in so that we can apply them to the network across the country. There's no one perfect way to do this, and at the same point, we're looking at 5 different ways right now, and they all have some positive lessons and some negative lessons, and we're trying to make sure we take those into account as we look at multiplying that across 3,200 counties and 56 states and territories across the country. So there's different ways to go about it. Some things go faster and some go slower, but we really are looking at all the options.
Okay, with that, I think we need to move on to our panel and give TJ a break here for a minute.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, TJ. Okay, we have our panel members today, and so we're going to first start by going around with each individual member and start talking about in the different particular areas, how do they see FirstNet helping and what they can gain by using FirstNet. And we'll start with Mike.
Now, from what I do in the Fusion Center world and the HIDA world, there's 20 HIDAs around the country. They focus the efforts of law enforcement from federal, state, and local to work counter narcotics. And our big issue is always communications from the vehicles, video surveillance, tracking of individuals. We need data for that. On the Fusion Center perspective, there's 78 Fusion Centers across the nation. Each state except for Wyoming has an operation, and including 3 of our U.S. territories. And what we do is we bring that collaboration point between our federal agencies, state and local agencies, to deal with threats. In California, we're along the lines for our fusion centers. There's a state center in Sacramento, but we have 4 regional centers that cover the federal judicial districts, the areas that the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force covers. But what we do a lot of in our efforts is, support during emergency communications, support during critical incidents. And we use a lot of technology for that. And I got to tell you, every time there's been a major incident out there, we lose comms one way or another. And I certainly would like to give up all the devices I have to carry around, satellite, phone for each carrier, and a classified phone. I will never get rid of the classified phone, I know, but if we can get rid of some of those, it'd reduce our costs, because we're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on those devices. The other piece is, as mentioned earlier, special event support. Being out there with both video technology, field collection data systems, every time that there's a major event, we can only throw so much line down for cameras. Microwave doesn't work everywhere. We have to have that ability that our ultimate goal is that every first responder out there could be a collector for us and getting us that real visual, real-time information of when bad things are happening. Too many times we've lost comms for whatever reason, and we haven't been able to actually show the story. And we've been, stopgap band-aiding that over the years, and it's not effective. When bad things are happening, people need data as quickly as possible, and our analysts need that information to produce the, enhance the information to focus our efforts. Whether that's, a bad guy terrorist that's running around, whether it's a natural disaster from an earthquake or a fire, we need those folks that are able to do that. And right now, we're not able to do that effectively. We're in the process right now, even in California, of developing some common operating pictures to show where things are happening, where our resources are at. We talk about license plate reader technology. Those things are great for finding our bad guys, but if that system out there deployed isn't giving us that information in real time, it's nice to know the guy was there, but if we can't get him within 10 minutes, he's off to do whatever disastrous behavior he's going to do, and is going to damage the population, hurt our citizens. So that's kind of what I'm looking at from my perspective, and I'll pass along. Sean.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks for the invite. So how many in the audience here are boaters and out on the water? So we got a few. VHF radio. Even VHF radios are transmitting data back to us that we can find where you are on the water, but here in the Bay Area, about 70% of those calls are coming in via the PSAPs or straight in calls to the Coast Guard. A lot of that data that we have when you're out on the water, where you are specifically, we don't get when we have just phone calls. So, there's a lot of legwork that goes into finding where that person is. So there's a lot of some efficiencies there. Also on the law enforcement side, there's a lot of work going on with local partner agencies where there's a lot of data flow back and forth, but in very disparate systems. So developing a backbone and systems that can share that is definitely beneficial for us.
I think back on now. So as I said earlier, the DoD's got 3 echelons of first response. We've got the installations level where we have our mutual aid across the fence lines. Then we've got the National Guard in the states, Title 32, Title 30, and then Title 10. And then we've got the big defense support to civil authorities. And we're certainly looking for increased capabilities through all of those. When we look at warfighter communications that I'd mentioned earlier, common operating pictures, geospatial awareness of data, information sharing across multiple echelons. We have mission partner. We don't go to war on our own. We go in with coalitions, global in nature, and with multiple instantiations across the globe. So we want to take those sorts of things and give it to our first responders. The data in the command post, if it's valuable in the command post, it should be valuable out at the tips of operations as well. So we're looking at that, and we certainly see the promise of FirstNet. But we also we're not sitting back, and I think that's why Karen pulls us all together like this. Is we're not just going to sit back and watch TJ. right? This is a team sport at the federal level. It's a team sport at the state, and so working together. So as I had mentioned earlier, sharing the information, partnering, and we want to, the hope in DoD is that we'll be doing some early implementation pilots as well. We want to see what it looks like at the installation level. Certainly learn with the 5 that are ongoing and then take that and see if there's something we can do to be helpful from that perspective as well. Let me see if I got everything there. I said everything I wanted to say. There you go.
And I just have a few comments I want to make. I'm listening as folks are letting us know at the state level what they need and what they want. I spent a day with the sheriff in Tuolumne County. He wanted me to understand the lack of communications that he had during the rimfire. So we drove out to where the rimfire base camp was, and no radios whatsoever. And so he was, you know, there were other folks that had a little bit of communications. He had none for all of his sheriffs to go and evacuate. So as we were driving down this hill, while it wasn't very far distance-wise, it took quite a ways to get to another point that we had radio coverage. And he goes, and this is where he was able to alert his sheriffs to get the evacuations. So in our rural areas, we have huge challenges that FirstNet will really be able to help us. Then I hear, actually it was a Bay Area event where the networks were shutting down because everybody was on the network tweeting or downloading or whatever it was they happened to be doing. And law enforcement, who really are depending on the commercial networks right now, are blocked. In working with the state of Washington, evidently the mayor of Seattle made an announcement to everyone to stay off their cell phones during the, I think it was a baseball game, World Series game. I don't follow sports that well. But anyway, there was a huge outcry that he did that, and he got a lot of negative press and a lot of pushback. But all he was trying to do was preserve some bandwidth for his officers. So we really need this network. And so what it is for all of you is to keep pushing that information up to us. Sue and her staff always wanting to hear this, because we need to communicate this back to TJ. And that's why we have these town halls, to hear from you so we can make sure that FirstNet hears us. So our challenges, the other piece of California, and especially as I've been talking to other states and seeing what they're doing, some of our smaller rural areas might be a larger city in another state. So we have to kind of look at that and balance that on what we need in California, but also be looking at the nationwide perspective, because everyone needs this network.
Well said, Karen. I think, a couple of themes that I think are important that were brought up here. One is it's public safety's network, and I don't think we can ever say that enough. This network is for public safety. All the things that we're trying to do to make it cost effective, to get increased rural coverage, to do things that are geared towards hardening and cybersecurity. At the end of the day, it's about providing a network to public safety that will work to meet your needs. And that's all I work on every day. That's all my staff works on every day. In my history in working in public safety, I learned a rule pretty simple. When I was hearing about the HIDA activities, I worked on a meth lab entry team many years ago as a state trooper, and we went into meth labs on a pretty regular basis and used that HIDA funding to root out a big meth problem that we had. But we were really good at breaking stuff, right? We were really good at breaking any tool that didn't work and taking great care of tools that worked. Doesn't matter what the tool was. If tools work and you hand it to a firefighter or you hand it to a police officer and it works, they'll take good care of it and they'll use it to its greatest extent. They might break it still now and then, but not intentionally, of course. But if you give them tools that don't work, they will find a way to make sure it never works. And so we know this. We're not dumb. We've been around the block. I've been around the block. I'm laughing at others in the room who've been around the block with me. And so we know at the end of the day, our goal is to provide tools that will really work for public safety. And that's why we're here. That's why I'm here. That's why we've had our chairwoman out. We've had all different members of my team go to every California town hall. We're going to continue to do that. We want to hear from all of you on what's important, what works, what doesn't work. What do you want to get out of your network? This is not a federal network. You won't hear me use that term because it's a nationwide public safety network. And by nationwide, it just means it's in every jurisdiction. It's available in every jurisdiction. Whether you choose to use it and buy service is up to you. but we want to make the network available. And my guess is if we do a pretty good job of listening and a pretty good job of deploying this network, public safety and jurisdictions across the country will want to leverage it.
I just had one comment. You know, in the Fusion Center world, we have a lot of public-private partnerships. One of those, and I'm glad we've got some guys here from Cisco, but we deal a lot with those folks on when systems go down. Part of the issues that we've realized over the last couple of years is how the physical nature of the sites, the backhaul that we're looking at is vulnerable. We've seen a number of fiber optic lines cut, and folks from Cisco and Yahoo and all our little Silicon Valley club have been more than happy to go out there, bring their emergency response vehicles, help set things up. But in this new world, where do they fit in? How do they fit in?
They definitely fit in. I mean, just look at the incident this week in Arizona where somebody went out with, vandals with a backhoe, I think looking for copper, but they dug up fiber. And certainly took out not just telecommunications and other internet service, which I guess now is all the same. Inside joke there on net neutrality. The reality is we have to rely on everybody in the technology sector and the telecommunications sector to be partners in different ways. Part of the partnering you see with the FirstNet element is from a funding perspective, but the other is this technology, all technology continues to evolve very quickly. And we're not in the days where we can design it ourselves, invent it ourselves. We have to leverage the innovation that's going on, and certainly here in the surrounding area, you certainly have a great hotbed of innovation, and we want to leverage all of that as we move forward. And we want to make sure that they're a part of solutions that are bidding on initial deployment of solutions, maintenance and operations of solutions, and bringing innovation when it comes to applications and leveraging the future. I recently spoke at an NSTAC meeting, which is one of the national meetings that most of these companies you mentioned have their CEOs or their presidents at, including some of the ones you just mentioned. And literally, I challenge them to think about technology a little bit different when it comes to R&D. So often there's solving the next big commercial problem or solving that problem that will really help be the next Facebook or whatever that may happen to be. And I said, think about the problem a little bit differently. What if you could solve the problem for authentication for the police officer? See the California Highway Patrol sitting in the back, and that's driving in excess of 100 miles an hour and is trying to get some good information, and they don't want to deal with an uppercase, lowercase, 14-digit password with special characters, but instead they're trying to deal with voice authentication. They're trying to deal with biometrics on the move in a vehicle where they don't have to do anything special. They're looking at heads-up displays, and you look at the different companies, Intel and Cisco and Microsoft and others that were all in the room, and the reality, I said, is try to solve that very unique public safety problem that will be a unique niche market that will probably be profitable for a small piece, but think about then taking that technology that you solve the high-speed police problem and now leverage it with the rest of America or the rest of the world who needs technology for better authentication without having to type in a password. All of a sudden it becomes very valuable, but you're solving the difficult problem for public safety for the greater good, and in the meantime you're creating your great business case for the rest of your business. And I think that really resonated with a lot of them. I had a number of them come up afterwards and say, we never really looked at it quite that way, but if we look at solving the problem for paramedics, solving the problem for firefighters, solving some of the heat and environmental issues that fire is very unique to solve, and look at how you can leverage that in other markets outside of public safety. I think if they could solve those problems for the public safety community, there's a big business case to be had in the tail that would come after that.
And I wanted to go back a minute to Sean. I was able to spend a day with his group at Treasure Island, and one of the things that really resonated with me is that they patrol 2 miles out from the coastline. And when you look at California's coastline, it's huge. And so some of the issues that we need to be looking at is really go beyond our land border off into the ocean.
Yeah, and actually, so out to 200, so it's expansive. And the reality is there's a lot of coastal California that is not populated. You get well north of Bodega Bay, going up towards Humboldt. It's very quiet. Same with south of Monterey. So there's a lot of room there, and people are currently taking liberty with the fact that there's not a lot of space there with blue suits or other law enforcement agencies. And it's a tough area to patrol, but it's also a tough area to get that information when things are happening to other responders, because we're not the only people on the block. We're in your neighborhoods, and all your responders are wanting to accomplish the same thing when it comes to that. So, yeah, it's daunting.
One of the things, though, that Karen brings up, and I think it's important for all of us, because I don't want to make promises to Commander Lansing that we can't back up, is the reality is there are some places that are going to be much harder to deploy than others. And a good example is water. I mean, when we meet with Hawaii or we meet with some of the islands, they have very different issues when you get out in between the islands or you get far offshore. Even in Maryland, they have issues in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. They don't have coverage. You know, you get too far from land, it's kind of hard to deal with some of the terrestrial coverage needs. And there are certain things that satellite and some of the future low Earth orbiting satellites, and there's some very neat stuff coming down the pike. A lot of great work being done there, especially even in Silicon Valley. There's been a lot of investment in looking at other ways to deploy LTE and networks just in general. And certainly we're looking at a lot of those kind of factors as they come forward. It doesn't work for everybody, but certainly there will be some other things that deal with areas where it's very hard to deploy terrestrially. And we also have to look around the country. It's different. You get up into Alaska and the current satellites don't do them any good for the most part. They're in the wrong spot on the Earth. And so when it comes to that, it doesn't mean that everything can be covered by satellites. So that's not a panacea. We all know just the cost and hassle of some devices is not that easy either. But there are some very unique things that Silicon Valley and some other technology companies are working on that are for much better coverage that can, you know, be not just terrestrially driven. The future of UAVs and some other things, pretty unique stuff that's coming that I think will help us eventually for some of those more unique areas.
I was just going to add, so a lot of our comms, when we get it back on the terrestrial side, it's pushed around through the networks over broadband. So maybe it's VHF when it comes to that terrestrial tower, but after that, it's being pushed, you know, through the pipes in other ways. So it's not just VHF.
So are there some questions for the panel? I think we were also gathering questions for the folks that were on the webinar. Do we have any? Oh, we have a question. Okay.
I got you. Hang
on. On the network, is there any vision of a central monitoring center, if you will, if there's a crisis where there could be a central command looking at not just listening in on the communications, but also looking at the location of the different devices on some kind of map, and would those centers be, you know, just in the 78 fusion centers, or would there be one that's national for like a Katrina type of thing, or local? Could you have a local monitoring center? And would those monitoring centers have access to the network to get the encrypted communications and that type of thing?
You asked a bevy of questions there. I'll answer the general question, which is, will there be a network operations center and a security operations center? The answer is yes. Will there be more than one? Yes. Where the exact locations of those end up being depend a lot on some of the acquisition process that we're going to be going through. But we plan to have very redundant network operations centers and security operations centers that leverage the best commercial and government practices and really leverage the different agencies that have the most important, you know, value that can be brought to bear there. We're also looking, to your point, of leveraging what can be done locally from a communication standpoint to leverage it. But any network of any size has to have a network operations center that looks at the entire network from what's happening on the network, the traffic, where congestion points are, all those kinds of issues.
I have just a comment on that, and I'm really glad to hear that there will be several network operation centers. And I think this is also going to be a challenge just from the IT perspective. Public safety has never been over an IT type of a network per se. And as we move toward next gen, we've already realized some of the challenges of doing that. We've had a 6-state outage only because the IT wasn't in tune to the same type of cues that on the regular commercial network or the 911 network that we watch for with the outages. So I think there's going to be some training on the IT world also as we monitor the network, just some of the differences between a commercial network and a public safety network.
On the tracking of devices, right now, everyone could actually be tracked right now with the right applications in place. The problem is the policy, and that's one of the bigger issues, and public discussion about what level of tracking do we want, and especially when we talked about a number of people are using their own personal devices. That's a whole other topic area, and I don't even want to get the unions engaged in this conversation. But that's a whole, trying to get to that point is difficult. True, does it make sense? Is it the right thing to do for public safety? If you're a public safety officer, you're out there getting the nearest law enforcement officer to you, nearest paramedic unit, nearest firefighter unit. I think that makes sense because right now the way we're set up in our country, we have so many agencies within the same jurisdiction. The nearest guy sometimes isn't the guy getting the call, and that's because no one has a clue where they're at. But those are just a few of my thoughts.
So I think you just touched on it. So you made a great observation earlier that most of our employees are using their personal cell phones. Would they subscribe into this system, or do I now have to buy 200 plus cell phones?
Yeah, it's a good question, and if you go to our public notice, we're leaning towards the ability that would be a possibility to do that. Obviously, there's a number of cyber and other questions, on duty, off duty, and how does that get utilized. But I'll give you an example that we put out there that I think is one of the easiest and also one of the most important is how do you deal with volunteers? So volunteer fire and EMS is a large portion of rural fire and EMS in America. And we wanted to make sure it was crystal clear that they are allowed to be on the network. And if you look at a lot of how they purchase often in bake sales. They purchase in raising money, fundraising, other things that need to be done. And in many cases today, they carry a personal device. Many of them do not and cannot afford a land mobile radio, certainly at a personal level, and many of the departments don't even have enough to give to every firefighter, so it wouldn't matter, or EMT or paramedic or whatever it happens to be in these rural areas. So certainly we're looking at the capability for that to be done. There's governance issues, you have to put into place. Just some simple examples, and Mike brought up a couple, but just think of what happens when a device is lost. How do you wipe a device, turn it off? These are all things that can be easily done with a knock and with the right kind of processes that are in place to deal with it, but we need to make sure that that's done just so that there aren't devices floating out there. If I were to do a device check of where is every device every agency has ever purchased today, I'm sure there's some people who'd be scrambling out of the room, right? So, these are all things we have to look at.
Hi. This may be a good panel to ask this question of. This will be the first network really that's will be shared with state, federal, and local first responders. Any thoughts about how we're going to all get along on the network and what's going to need? To me, it seems like we're going to need some governance, and we're going to need a lot of operational collaboration and cooperation among agencies to make it work. But what are your thoughts from each of your perspectives?
So Joe Wassel from DOD. So I was up in Chicago. Fascinating place to go. Home of the president, 13 counties, 3 states, 3 governors, National Guards, on and on. World's largest airport, third largest city in America, second largest city, and third largest city in America. And they had concerns. They said, so we drive out our vehicle, and then FEMA drives out a vehicle and parks it right next to ours, and then the National Guard, maybe 3 National Guards pull up next to them, and maybe we might get an airport authority out there, and they started lining these sorts of things up. And there wasn't a technical reason why, if one went down, why they couldn't share with the other, but it was a policy reason. You've heard of potentially dirty internet, right? That it's not configured the way we configure these sorts of things. It's a complex issue. Is a great question, and it's really one of the early ones we tried to get past. And unfortunately, the only thing that we have that fixes it at this point is the conditions. If the conditions are such, then some of the policy issues go out of the way, but that's not really a way to run a network, right? Then you got work to do afterwards. So it's a great question. It's a complex answer. I'm not sure we've got an answer at this point, and I think that's going to be one of the key cybersecurity challenges. Is it's not necessarily going to be the technology, it's going to be the policy issues. And I think one of the, again, just to kind of foot stomp, that we're all here, is that this network's going to be built in some ways at the speed of trust and the relationships that are going to be in place as well. So there's just I wish I had a better answer for you, but we're certainly aware of the issue, and we want to be part of the solution.
one of the other things, and FirstNet is breaking down barriers that we have never been able to break down before. Federal government comes out to the state, we're from the feds, we're here to help, and they say, okay, then we turn around and we go out to all of you, we're from the state, we're here to help, and it's always, yeah, right. This time, it's actually a law that's here to help. And so I think some of the jurisdictional challenges that we've had in the past in California, and I'm only going to speak to California, I can imagine Chicago, but to speak to California right now, some of our jurisdictional challenges, I believe FirstNet is going to bring people to the table and start working together like we've never seen it before, because we truly will have an interoperable network. So I just think some of the dynamics that we've seen in the past are going to change because of what this network brings to us.
I think Karen raised some great points. I think the technology doesn't become the crutch anymore for some of the operational issues, right? So if the technology can allow it, now to Barry's point, it becomes more of a governance issue, and what do you do to make it work? We have started the Public Safety Advisory Committee at looking at this. We want the PSAC, which Barry's a member of, by the way. We want the PSAC to very much look at priority and preemption as well. And really where a lot of this food fight will happen is in the priority and preemption discussion. You know, the issue of who has priority over whom is the issue that will drive more popcorn fights, you know, at the end of the day. But I think it's a good problem to be able to work with, to have a network and to have spectrum across the country that is the same in every jurisdiction, to have technology that's all based on LTE, the same technology across the country, and to have what Mike mentioned earlier, have the ability, as long as, you know, whoever's on duty, let's say, of all the available police officers, firefighters, paramedics that are closest to you, regardless of agency you work for, to be available when an officer gets shot, when people are down and they're injured and there's public safety at risk. And I think that's something that, you know, I think is a shame when we hear that somebody was 3 blocks away and didn't know, they didn't hear. And we know this happens all the time. This isn't like a one-off incident. And so these are the things that I hope we can solve with the technology piece, and then the rest comes to human beings. It's going to come to people getting around, you know, in rooms like this, around tables, and having good discussions and creating good governance that works well and creating priority and preemption. The technology will allow it. It's something that we're testing in our labs, and I've seen it work. I've seen overload situations work on the LTE network where public safety gets priority. So we know the technology can make this happen. And then it comes down to us creating our own lists of key priority for our public safety first responders and how that will work together in particular parts of the country. And to Karen's point from earlier, you know, sometimes without state lines being drawn in the middle. You know, I've driven over many state lines. I've never tripped over one. You know, they're usually pretty hard to find exactly where that state line is. In some cases, the county and city lines as well. So there's often a little sign a few feet off the side of the road that's not exactly in the right place usually either. But that said, you know, the reality is the technology shouldn't be the crutch that keeps us from doing it in the future.
And from our federal partners, as far as the technology, I mean, they're buying yesterday's technology to deploy 5 years from now. So if you go into some of the locations that have dispatch center capabilities, they're using stuff there that last time I saw it was on Star Trek with Kirk. And so it's older stuff. I mean, they're looking for, you know, how do they upgrade? How do they use the equipment better? And how do we use it so that way we can have both federal, state, and local law enforcement, public safety talking with each other? The big thing is going to be the policies. That's going to be the hardest part. The other piece on this, to get everyone to play together, I mean, the money's part of the hook, but the guidance, whether it be grant guidance, whether it be, you know, policy and law, however that's developed, to get everyone to sit down and say, and the hard part is going to be, I got priority because, you know, I do this type of operation. And that's going to be the discussion point that is probably going to needle most people in the end of when this finally gets deployed.
Having one of those command centers with that technology from that area, I would agree. There's, you know, the efficiency it'll bring to the workforce is great. You talked earlier about attracting that workforce. I mean, there's on multiple levels, there's good reasons that the system, what it would bring to the table. My question is this a backbone, and later on the systems start talking to each other, and where is that? Is that more upon the local governments, or is that going to be something that's going to be driven a little bit from the federal?
Yes, both. I think it's a complex answer when it comes to the different elements of applications, but just to go back to the example Mike used a little bit earlier, you know, we're building a backbone that's built on open standards, and we're going to have the ability to have lots of open standards applications that are added to that backbone. There's a dividing line between open standards and having a cool product. So, I mean, just as an example, if somebody were to have an iPhone, the reality is there are certain proprietary things that are there. But if you have open standards that come to how are applications allowed on the network, what kinds of different operating systems are allowed on the network, what are the key things so that, you know, our push-to-talk works with your push-to-talk, those kinds of key elements that we need to keep open that are in the Act. We have a requirement to do that. So we're going to really push hard to make sure we keep those requirements where they need to be. But at the same point, we want to look at the economies of scale. Something public safety has suffered from, just in my era anyway, is not having economies of scale, not having the nationwide buying power when it comes to millions of police officers, firefighters, and paramedics. And this is something that I think is really important to public safety. And to your point, my guess is if you could buy the kinds of applications on the front end and the back end that everybody else could buy across the country at a lower cost, you'd be very interested in that.
Any more questions?
So just a comment, it almost sounds like for this to work, you made the comment that, sorry, you made the comment that you don't have to opt in if you don't want to. But if not everybody opts in, this won't work. And if you decided not to opt in, there's also the political part. If you were the only agency in, say, a county that didn't opt in, then you'd be the odd man out. So the cynical cop part of me talking, sorry, is that the only way this is going to work is if everybody comes to the table and plays.
I would love it if you're encouraging everybody to come to the table and play. That's a great thing.
No, I mean, it sounds good. I mean, it sounds really good. But I mean, that's where you don't have to if you don't want to, but I don't see it working if a large chunk of people said, I don't want to play.
But I think there's a push-pull difference, as you know and I know from being a former police officer. The goal is if I'm forced to do it, I'm going to complain about it. If I have the option of whether I can buy in or not, and I realize everybody else around me has it and it works, I'm probably going to buy in. And so I'd rather give you that incentive to go do that.
I always mention this because I love my partners at FEMA and Bureau of Justice Assistance. If they start making grants only possible to procure the equipment, that's the other piece of it. Helps out.
I knew you'd say it was the better capability, a lower price point. That's all I ever hear. And that's what we're hoping for. And they heard some of the power of the billion-dollar opportunity I have every year for our cellular and LMR support in the department. So as I get the opportunity for the National Guard at the state level, I can't have the National Guard and a state go in a different direction. It breaks my buying model. But I think that there does appear to be more of an incentive to go this direction, more carrot than stick, right? I think that's really that you know, for far too long we've been planning with the assumption that we're going to lose cellular capability, and we're right every single time. And then we make another statement, if Texas were here, and I think Karen agrees with this as well, is that LMR is not good enough for mission critical voice any longer. And we've got example after example after example. So when I'm in the department trying to get folks to focus on public safety communications in that big warfighting communications world, you know, we just can't afford. Well, this is a risk worth taking. We've got to do this, and really a lot. We've been saying this as well. We're not doing this for us. There's 10 echelons of workforce out there, from the 20 group, the 30 group, the 40 group, the 50 group, the 60 group, and we're doing this for the lower echelons. I think the average age of the warfighter and first responder in the department is probably 25 years or younger. With that 20-year retirement age.
We're doing it for all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good.
Well, and the comment I want to make is you can't pry these things out of our younger generations. I have kids that these don't come out of their hands. And as the folks come out of college and they're joining the forces, whether it be law, fire, EMS, they're going to be so used to using these tools, it's going to be difficult for them to not use them, which is why so many of our first responders are using their own personal cell phones or smartphones to do their work today, which also challenges FirstNet to be able to meet that need as well, because maybe not all departments can buy these devices, but if the people there want to buy them and use them on their own, it's the challenge of FirstNet to make sure that would be something they can do. Any more questions? Wow. Well, thank you all very much. I have had a great day. And before we wrap up really fast, I just want to add, for all of you, everyone in attendance both on the webinar and in person today will be on the list as well when we have our state consultation, so you'll be getting an invite for that. We're just grabbing as many folks as we can to participate in our state consultation process. We're also going to have a couple of upcoming events. The APCO Western National Conference is April 8th through the 10th. I know TJ will be there, as well as we'll be having our Calfrin board, and there will be a lot of discussion on FirstNet. And then we also have several other meetings coming up that we've been talking as we go. So if anyone wants more information, please let our group know. Thank you all so very much for coming today.